They told me the search grid ended at Devil's Creek. What they didn't tell me was why every ranger before me refused to cross it. I found out on my third night, and I've been filing false reports ever since. My name is Cole Masterson, and I've been a ranger at Yosemite National Forest for 6 years. 6 years of granite cliffs and ancient sequoias, of helping tourists find Half Dome and rescuing the occasional unprepared hiker from the backcountry. 6 years of telling myself that the warnings from the old-timers were just stories, that the missing persons cases had rational explanations, that the strange markings on trees in the remote sections were just bear scratches. I was wrong about everything. It started 3 weeks ago when Ridge Walker transferred to my district. Ridge was one of those rangers who had seen it all, 23 years in the service, postings everywhere from Denali to the Everglades. He was supposed to be my supervisor for the season, but when he arrived at the Tuolumne station, something was off. He looked older than his 51 years, like something had worn him down from the inside. His hands shook when he poured coffee, and he refused to patrol alone after sunset. On his second day, Ridge pulled me aside in the equipment room. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Cole, I need you to promise me something. If I ever go missing, if I don't report in, don't come looking for me past Devil's Creek. You hear me? Don't cross that water." I laughed it off. "Ridge, you feeling okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." His expression didn't change. "I've seen worse than ghosts. There are places in Yosemite that don't belong to us. Never have. The old Awanichi people knew it. That's why certain areas were forbidden. We just drew our maps right over those boundaries and pretended it didn't matter." Before I could respond, the radio crackled. We had a situation. 2 hikers overdue on the Hetch Hetchy Trail. Ridge's face went pale when he heard the location. "That's north of the creek," he said quietly. "That's past the line." We mobilized anyway. Standard search and rescue. Ridge insisted on staying at base camp while I took 2 other rangers, Sarah Chen and Marcus Reeves, to sweep the trail. The hike in took us 4 hours, deeper into Yosemite's backcountry than most tourists ever ventured. The forest here felt different. The sequoias grew so thick that daylight barely penetrated the canopy. Even the sound of our boots on the trail seemed muted, absorbed by something in the air itself. We found the hikers' campsite around dusk. 2 tents, still zipped closed. Supplies scattered across the ground like someone had torn through them in a panic. But no hikers, no sign of struggle beyond the mess, just silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring because it's so complete, so unnatural. No birds, no insects, nothing. Sarah found the first marking on a nearby sequoia. "Claw marks," she called out. "Fresh ones. Look at the depth." I walked over and immediately felt my stomach drop. The gouges in the bark were deep, easily 3 inches into the wood, 4 parallel lines running from 8 feet up the trunk down to chest height. The wood beneath was still fresh, sap oozing from the cuts, but the spacing was wrong. No bear has claws that long or that far apart, and the angle suggested whatever made them had been standing upright, reaching down. Marcus was checking his GPS. "We're about half a mile past Devil's Creek. Should we keep searching or wait for daylight?" I looked at the sky. We had maybe an hour of light left. I thought about Ridge's warning, about his shaking hands and haunted expression. Then I thought about 2 missing hikers who might be injured and dying while we debated. "We keep searching," I said, "but we stay together. Nobody splits off." We found the first body 20 minutes later. Male, early 30s, matching the description of one of the hikers. He was on the ground beside a fallen log, and at first glance, it looked like he was sleeping. Then we got closer and saw what had been done to him. His chest had been opened, ribs spread wide like wings. The organs were missing, all of them, just a hollow cavity where they should have been. But there was barely any blood on the ground. It was like something had carefully removed everything and taken it away. Sarah turned and vomited. Marcus grabbed his radio, calling it in, but all he got was static. "We're too deep in," he said. "Can't get a signal." The light was fading fast now. I made a decision. We mark this location, we get back to base camp, and we come back with a full team in the morning. We're not equipped for this. But as we turned to leave, I heard it, a sound from deeper in the forest. Not quite animal, not quite human. A low, resonant call that seemed to vibrate through the trees themselves. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, then stopped. In the silence that followed, we heard movement. Something large, moving through the underbrush about 50 yards to our east, moving parallel to us. "Walk," I said quietly. "Don't run." Just walk." We moved quickly but deliberately back down the trail. The movement in the forest kept pace with us, always the same distance away, always just out of sight. Sometimes I caught glimpses through the trees, something tall and dark moving between the sequoias, but every time I looked directly at it, there was nothing there, just shadows and bark and the dying light. We were maybe 200 yards from Devil's Creek when Marcus stopped walking. "I can't," he gasped. "I can't move my legs." I grabbed his arm. "Yes, you can. We're almost there. Just keep moving." "No," he said, and there was pure terror in his voice. "I literally cannot move. Something won't let me." I looked down and saw what he meant. Marcus's boots were sinking into the ground, not like mud or soft earth. The solid trail was somehow pulling him down. His feet were already submerged to the ankles, and as we watched, he sank deeper. The ground made no sound, showed no cracks or disturbance. His legs were just disappearing into solid earth. Sarah and I grabbed him, trying to pull him up, but it was like fighting quicksand. The harder we pulled, the faster he sank. Marcus was screaming now, clawing at the ground, at us, at anything. He went down to his knees, then his waist. That's when I saw the expression change on his face. The terror became something else, something worse. His eyes went glassy and vacant, and his screaming stopped. His mouth kept moving, but no sound came out. Then he smiled, a wide, impossible smile that showed too many teeth. "That's not Marcus anymore," Sarah whispered. She was right. Whatever was looking out of Marcus's eyes wasn't him, wasn't human. I made a decision that still haunts me. I let go. Sarah and I backed away as Marcus, or what was wearing Marcus, sank down to his chest, his neck, his chin. The smile never wavered, even as the ground swallowed his head. I could see that terrible smile through the earth, getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. Then the ground was solid again, undisturbed, like nothing had happened. Sarah and I ran. We ran like hell itself was behind us, crashing through the underbrush, tripping over roots, not caring about the noise we made. Behind us, that sound came again, that low, resonant call. But this time it was closer, much closer, and underneath it, I heard something else. Laughter. Marcus's laughter, but wrong. Too deep, too rhythmic, too much like that resonant call. We burst through the tree line and splashed across Devil's Creek. The water was ice cold and barely ankle deep, but the moment we crossed it, everything changed. The oppressive silence lifted. We could hear normal forest sounds again. Wind in the trees, water flowing, our own ragged breathing. I turned back to look at the forest we'd just escaped from, and it looked wrong. The shadows were too dark, too thick. The trees on that side of the creek seemed to lean inward, like they were watching us. Sarah collapsed on the far bank, sobbing. "He's gone. Marcus is gone. What the hell was that? What took him?" I had no answer. We made it back to base camp an hour later, flashlights cutting through the darkness, jumping at every sound. Ridge was waiting at the trailhead. When he saw there were only two of us, his face fell. "You crossed the creek," he said quietly. "You went past the line. We had to. There were missing hikers, and now there's a missing ranger." Ridge looked at me with those haunted eyes. "What did you see?" I told him everything. The body with missing organs, the thing that paced us through the forest, Marcus sinking into solid ground while something else looked out from his eyes. Ridge listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I need to show you something. Come with me. Just you, Cole. Sarah, you stay here and try to get some sleep. Take a sedative if you need to." Ridge led me to his quarters, a small cabin near the main ranger station. Inside, the walls were covered with maps, photographs, and documents. String connected different points on the maps, creating complex webs. He saw me staring and said, "I've been tracking it for 11 years, ever since my partner disappeared in Olympic National Forest. Same pattern. Missing hikers, bodies with organs removed, people vanishing into thin air, always in the oldest, deepest parts of the forest. Always past some natural boundary. A creek, a ridgeline, a particular stand of trees." "What is it?" Ridge pulled out a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. This belonged to a ranger named William Everett. He worked Yosemite in the 1930s. He saw what you saw. He documented it. He handed me the journal, read the last entry. I opened to the marked page and read Everett's cramped handwriting. The date was October 15th, 1938. Have concluded that certain sections of Yosemite are not truly part of our world. They exist in a state of overlap, where something else bleeds through. The Awanichi called it the thin place, said it was where the world of the living and the world of the hungry dead meet. They built their villages carefully, always avoiding these areas. We should have listened. Instead, we built trails right through them. Now it knows we're here. Now it's learned to hunt us. I looked up at Ridge. You're saying there's a place in Yosemite where reality breaks down? Where something from somewhere else can reach through? I'm saying there are places in every old forest where the boundaries get thin, where something ancient and hungry has found a way to feed. It takes people. It takes their organs, their memories, their shapes, and it's been doing it for a very long time. Over the next week, I learned more than I wanted to know. Ridge had compiled reports going back decades. Hundreds of missing persons in national forests across the country. Patterns of disappearances clustered around specific areas. Bodies found in impossible positions or impossible conditions. And always, always, that natural boundary. A creek, a ridge, a line in the forest past which the rules changed. We filed official reports, of course. Told the truth about Marcus to an extent. Said he'd fallen into a sinkhole or crevasse. That we'd been unable to recover the body. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth, but Ridge convinced me it was necessary. If we told the real truth, we'd be labeled insane, probably fired, and then there'd be no one watching, no one maintaining the boundaries, no one warning people away. The second body turned up 5 days later. Female hiker, mid-20s, one of the two we'd been searching for originally. She was found by a trail crew working on the south side of Devil's Creek, miles from where she'd gone missing. Her body was arranged in a sitting position against a tree, facing the trail. Her eyes were open, and inside her chest cavity, where her heart should have been, someone had placed a perfect replica made of twisted roots and moss. It was still beating. The coroner who examined her called me personally. Cole, I need you to understand something. This woman died at least a week ago. But that thing in her chest, that root structure, it's alive, it's functioning. I don't know what kind of sick bastard did this, but they created something that should not exist. I didn't tell him that no human had done this, that what we were dealing with was so far beyond human capability that calling it murder felt inadequate. This was something else. This was a message, a demonstration of power. Ridge became obsessed. He spent every night poring over his maps and journals, trying to find a pattern, a weakness, something we could use. I found him one morning asleep at his desk, having marked 17 new disappearances from the past month alone, all in the same general area, all past Devil's Creek. It's getting more active, he said when I woke him. Something's changed. It used to take one person every few months. Now it's hunting almost every night. Maybe we disturbed something when we built that new trail extension last year. Maybe we pushed too far into its territory. So what do? Close the area? And tell them what? That there's a monster in Yosemite? They'll laugh us out of the service. No, we need proof. We need documentation that even they can't ignore. That's how we ended up planning the expedition. Just Ridge and me, heading back past Devil's Creek with every camera and recording device we could carry. We document whatever was out there, get irrefutable evidence, and force the Park Service to acknowledge what was happening. It was insane. It was suicidal. It was the only option that made sense. We went in at dawn on a Tuesday. The forest was wreathed in fog, thick enough that visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. Perfect conditions for something to hunt. We crossed Devil's Creek and immediately felt the change. The air became heavier, harder to breathe. The fog seemed to press against us with physical weight. Our compasses started spinning randomly, useless. GPS signals dropped. We were on our own. We followed the trail north for an hour before Ridge stopped. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I listened. At first, nothing. Then I caught it. A rhythmic sound, like breathing, but too slow, too deep, each breath lasting maybe 30 seconds. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. It was coming from all around us, from the forest itself. Ridge pulled out a digital recorder. "Whatever you are," he called out, "we know you're here. We're not afraid of you." The breathing stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Ridge's voice, echoing back from the fog. "We're not afraid of you," but with the words slightly rearranged. "Not afraid of you, we're not." Then again, from a different direction. "Afraid you're not, we're of." The words kept shifting. kept changing, like something was learning language by breaking it apart and rebuilding it wrong. Ridge grabbed my arm. Back to the creek, now. But when we turned around, the trail was gone. Just forest in every direction. Dense sequoias and fog and that terrible breathing starting up again. We tried retracing our steps, but every direction looked the same. We were lost, completely, utterly lost in a forest I'd been working for 6 years. That's when I saw them. Figures in the fog, dozens of them, standing between the trees. At first, I thought they were people, hikers or other rangers. Then I realized they weren't moving, not breathing, just standing there watching us. As my eyes adjusted, I saw what they really were. Trees. The figures were trees, but they were wrong. Their bark had shapes pressed into it from the inside, like faces and bodies trying to push through. Some of the faces I recognized. Marcus, the male hiker we'd found. Others I didn't know, all of them screaming silently, trapped in the wood. Ridge saw them too. He made a sound like a wounded animal and stumbled backward. "That's where they go," he whispered. "That's what it does with them. It puts them in the trees, makes them part of the forest. They're all still alive in there, still aware." One of the trees moved, not swaying in wind, but deliberately moving, its trunk bending like a joint. The face pressed against the bark, Marcus's face, opened its wooden mouth and screamed. The sound was like nothing human, like wind through a hollow cave mixed with breaking branches. Other trees started moving too, bending toward us, reaching with branches that looked too much like arms. We ran. The forest closed in around us, trees grabbing at our clothes, roots rising up to trip us. Ridge was ahead of me, crashing through the underbrush with desperate energy. I could hear water ahead. Devil's Creek, it had to be. We were almost out. Then Ridge vanished. 1 second he was there, the next he was gone. I skidded to a stop and looked around wildly. "Ridge!" I shouted. "Ridge, where are you?" I heard him respond, but his voice came from above. I looked up and saw him hanging in the air about 15 feet off the ground. No rope, no support. Just suspended there like gravity had stopped working on him. His arms and legs were spread wide, held by invisible forces. As I watched, his body started to change. His skin took on a rough texture, darkening to the color of bark. His fingers stretched and branched like twigs. He was becoming a tree. Right in front of me, Ridge Walker was transforming into a tree. His eyes found mine. He was still conscious, still aware. His mouth moved, forming words. "Run. Cross the creek. Don't look back." I ran. Behind me, I heard Ridge screaming as the transformation completed, his voice turning into that terrible wooden sound. I crashed through the forest with no sense of direction, just moving, just trying to escape. Branches whipped my face, roots grabbed my feet. The breathing sound surrounded me, getting louder, like the entire forest was inhaling. I burst out of the tree line and saw water. Devil's Creek, just 30 feet ahead. I sprinted for it, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. Something grabbed my backpack, yanking me backward. I shrugged out of the straps and kept running. 10 feet, 5 feet. I could see the far bank, could see normal forest where the trees grew normally, and the fog was just fog. I jumped. For a moment, I was airborne over the creek, suspended between two worlds. Then I hit the water and splashed across to the far side. The moment my feet touched the opposite bank, everything stopped. The breathing ceased. The pressure in the air lifted. I turned back and saw the forest across Devil's Creek, dark and wrong and hungry, but unable to cross the water. Standing at the edge of the creek, barely visible in the fog, was a figure. Tall, impossibly tall, maybe 9 feet high. Its body was made of twisted wood and shadow, bark and darkness woven together into something that mimicked a human shape. It had no face, just a blank expanse where a face should be, smooth like polished wood. But I could feel it watching me, judging me, deciding. It raised one arm, pointing at me with a hand that had too many fingers, each one branching like a twig. Then it spoke, not with sound, but directly into my mind. Words formed there that I didn't want to understand but couldn't ignore. "You have seen, you know. Tell them, warn them. This forest is not yours, has never been yours. We allow you to walk the edges, to play at understanding nature. But past the lines we have drawn, past the boundaries we have set, you are ours. You are food. You are materials. You are nothing." The figure took a step backward and dissolved into the fog. But before it vanished completely, I saw other figures behind it. Dozens, hundreds. An army of those tall, faceless things standing in the forest, waiting, watching. I staggered back to the ranger station and filed my report. Missing ranger, lost to undetermined circumstances, unable to recover body. The lie felt like choking. Ridge had died, or worse than died, trying to protect people from something they didn't know existed. And I was covering it up, maintaining the fiction that Yosemite was safe and manageable and understood. But I didn't have a choice, because I knew the truth now. I knew what Ridge had known, what William Everett had known, what every ranger who'd worked these forests long enough eventually learned. There are boundaries in the wilderness that have nothing to do with our maps and trails. There are places where something else has claim, has power, has hunger. And when we cross those boundaries, when we ignore those claims, we pay the price. Over the next 2 weeks, I quietly implemented changes. I had Devil's Creek Trail officially closed for habitat restoration, posted signs warning hikers to stay on marked paths, increased patrols on the southern trails to keep people away from the boundary. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, but it was something. The other rangers noticed the changes, asked questions. I deflected, made excuses, hid behind bureaucracy. Only Sarah Chen knew the truth, and she'd requested a transfer to Death Valley. "Can't be in the forest anymore," she told me. "Can't sleep with all those trees around. I see faces in them now, all the time." I understood. Some nights I saw them too. Marcus's face pressed against bark, still screaming. Ridge suspended in air, turning to wood. The male hiker with the empty chest cavity. They haunted my dreams and my waking hours equally. But the worst part was the knowledge. The certainty that this wasn't isolated to Yosemite. Ridge's research had shown the pattern. Every old forest had its thin places, its boundaries, its hungry things. How many people had walked past Devil's Creek equivalents in other parks, other forests, other wildernesses? How many had crossed invisible lines and never returned? How many were hanging in the air right now, transforming slowly into trees while something ancient fed on their consciousness? I started keeping my own journal, documenting everything Ridge had taught me and everything I'd learned since, just like William Everett had in the 1930s. A record for whoever came after me, whoever would be the next ranger to discover the truth. Because there would be a next one. There always was. The forest made sure of it. 3 months after Ridge vanished, I was doing a routine patrol when I found fresh claw marks on a sequoia just south of Devil's Creek. 4 parallel gouges, each 3 inches deep. But these were on our side of the boundary. The thing, whatever it was, had crossed over. The rules were changing. I reported it immediately, requesting immediate closure of the entire northern section of Yosemite. The regional director denied it. "Budget concerns," she said. "Tourist season concerns. Public relations concerns. Everything except the only concern that mattered. That something in those woods was hunting, and now it was hunting on our side of the line." That night, I got a call. Hiker reporting strange sounds near the Tuolumne camping area, south of Devil's Creek by at least 3 miles. "Sounds like someone in distress," the dispatcher said. Multiple campers reporting it. I drove out with another ranger named James Foster, a rookie who'd been with us for 6 months. We reached the camping area around midnight. The place was in chaos. Families were packing up in the dark, loading vehicles, clearly terrified. Several people were crying. A few were on their phones, though service was spotty at best. A man in his 50s approached us. "Ranger, thank God. There's something out there, something in the trees." It was calling to my wife using her sister's voice, her sister, who died 2 years ago. Other campers echoed similar stories, voices of dead relatives, children's laughter from empty tents, that breathing sound, slow and deep, coming from the darkness beyond the campfire light. I felt my stomach drop. It was here. It had crossed every boundary we'd assumed was safe. James looked at me. Should we investigate? I thought about Marcus, about Ridge, about all the names in Everett's journal, in Ridge's files, in my own growing list. Then I thought about the families here, the children, the innocent people who just wanted to enjoy nature and had no idea what they'd stumbled into. "No," I said. "We evacuate everyone, right now, total evacuation of this area." "On what grounds?" James asked. I looked him in the eyes. "On the grounds that, if we don't, people are going to die. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And I'm not willing to have that on my conscience." We spent the next 4 hours evacuating the camping area. Some people were grateful. Others were angry, demanding explanations I couldn't give. By dawn, the area was empty. James and I stood in the deserted campground, surrounded by abandoned fire rings and tent sites, and I knew this was just the beginning. The thing past Devil's Creek was expanding its territory, pushing outward. Soon there would be no safe zones in Yosemite. Soon the entire forest would be compromised. I'm writing this now from my quarters at the ranger station. It's 3 a.m. and I can't sleep. Outside my window, I can see the tree line. In the darkness between the sequoias, I see movement. Tall figures, too tall to be human, standing motionless, watching, waiting. Tomorrow I'm going to file my resignation. I'm going to take everything Ridge gave me, everything I've learned, and I'm going to try to warn people. Not officially, they'd never let me, but somehow. Blog posts, anonymous reports, something. Because the truth is, Yosemite isn't safe anymore. Maybe it never was. We just didn't know it. They told me the search grid ended at Devil's Creek. What they didn't tell me was that Devil's Creek was never meant to keep us out. It was meant to keep something else in. And we broke that barrier. We pushed too far, built too many trails, brought too many people into places that were never meant for us. Now the barrier is breaking down completely. The boundary is collapsing, and what's on the other side is coming through. I can hear it now, that slow breathing, getting closer every night. I can see Ridge in the trees sometimes, his face pressing against the bark, trying to warn me, trying to tell me something, but I can't understand the words. The language of trees is not meant for human comprehension. This is my warning, my testimony. If you're reading this, if you're planning to visit Yosemite or any old-growth forest, please understand. There are places in the wilderness that don't belong to us, never have. There are boundaries that should not be crossed. And if you hear voices in the dark, voices of people you know, voices calling you deeper into the woods, don't listen, don't go, because once you cross that line, once you step past whatever invisible boundary separates their world from ours, you're not coming back, not as yourself, not as anything human. The search grid ended at Devil's Creek. I know now that it should have ended long before that. Should have ended at the edge of the parking lot. Should have ended at the welcome sign. Because the deeper truth is this. We're all past the line already. We've all crossed into their territory. We just don't know it yet. And they're patient. So patient. They've been here for thousands of years. They can wait a little longer. Wait for us to push deeper. Wait for us to forget the warnings. Wait for the moment when they can finally cross over completely and reclaim what was always theirs. I am Cole Masterson. I was a ranger at Yosemite National Forest. And I'm telling you to stay away. Stay away from Devil's Creek. Stay away from the old growth areas. Stay away from any place in the forest where the silence becomes absolute and the fog grows thick and the trees look like they're watching you. Because they are watching. They're always watching. And they're so very, very hungry. The breathing is right outside my door now. I can see shadows moving past the windows. Multiple shadows. Tall and wrong and patient. My time is almost up, but I've said what needed to be said. I've passed the warning on. Don't cross the creek, don't go past the line, and if you do, God help you, because no one else can. This is Cole Masterson, signing off, for the last time. They call it the protocol at Denali, a list of rules we follow when hikers report hearing their own voices calling from the tree line. We don't tell them the protocol exists. We just follow it and hope they make it out. At Black Hills National Forest, we have our own protocol. We don't call it that officially. We call it Standard Operating Procedure 47B, buried in a manual most rangers never fully read. But those of us who've worked the deep sections, the old growth areas where the ponderosa pines grow thick as fortress walls and the granite spires cut the sky like broken teeth, we know what SOP 47B really means. It means something walks those forests that shouldn't exist, something that wears stolen faces and speaks with borrowed voices, something the Lakota called the Skinwalker, though that name doesn't quite capture the full horror of what it is. My name is Hunter James, and I've been a ranger at Black Hills for 9 years. I thought I understood the forest. I thought I knew its dangers, its moods, its secrets. 3 weeks ago, I learned how wrong I was. 3 weeks ago, I watched my partner Wyatt Turner die in a way that still makes me wake up screaming. And I learned that some things in those hills are older than the trees, older than the stone, older than any human memory. Things that have learned to hunt us with a patience and intelligence that makes every instinct scream that we are not the dominant species here. This is my account of what happened in the North Sector, in the wilderness area they've now quietly closed to public access. The official reason is trail damage from the spring floods. But there were no floods this spring. The real reason is that something has claimed that territory, something that's been there longer than we have, and it's made very clear that it won't tolerate intrusion anymore. I'm writing this because people need to know. Because hikers still try to access those trails through unmarked routes. Because my supervisor told me to forget what I saw, to accept the official story, to move on. Because Wyatt's family deserves to know the truth about how their son died, even if that truth is impossible to believe. The morning it started was unremarkable. Late October, the tourist season winding down, the air carrying that crystalline cold that promises winter. Wyatt and I were assigned to investigate a report from a group of bow hunters who'd come out of the North Sector 2 days early, spooked by something they wouldn't fully describe. The lead hunter, a man named Carl Hodges who'd been coming to Black Hills for 20 years, had filed a complaint at the ranger station that was mostly incoherent. He mentioned voices in the night, movement in the trees that didn't match any animal he knew, a smell like rotting meat mixed with something chemical, acrid. His hands shook the entire time he gave his statement. Probably just got scared by a mountain lion, my supervisor said, assigning us to check it out. But protocol says we investigate every report from that sector. You know the rules. I knew the rules. SOP 47B. Minimum 2 rangers. Maintain radio contact every 2 hours. Carry long guns, not just sidearms. Document everything. And most importantly, the rule that was never written down, but everyone understood. If you see something that doesn't make sense, something that seems wrong in a way you can't articulate, you get out immediately and report it. No heroics, no investigations. You leave. Wyatt was younger than me by 5 years, eager and competent, one of those rangers who actually read the entire operations manual. He was excited about the assignment, saw it as a chance to prove himself. I should have paid attention to my instincts, the unease that settled into my stomach when I saw which sector we'd been assigned. But I pushed it down, told myself I was being paranoid, and we set out at dawn with full packs and enough supplies for 3 days if needed. The North Sector trail started at the Canyon Lake area and wound up through increasingly dense pine forest into the limestone ridge country. The Black Hills aren't technically mountains. They're an isolated uplift of ancient stone surrounded by prairie, but they rise high enough and steep enough that the terrain gets rugged fast. The forest changes as you gain elevation, from the open park-like stands of ponderosa near the trailhead to dense clusters of spruce and aspen higher up, and finally to the old-growth areas where the trees grow so thick that sunlight barely penetrates even at midday. We were heading to one of those old-growth sections, to the area where the hunters had been camped. It was about 12 miles in, accessible only by trail, in a valley between 2 granite ridges that the old maps called the Devil's Gateway. The Lakota had avoided that area, according to the historical records. They had stories about it, about spirits that wore false skins and stole voices from dying men. I'd always assumed those stories were just cultural mythology, the kind of folklore that grows naturally in isolated places. I don't assume that anymore. The hike started normally enough. Clear trail, well marked, the morning sun filtering through the pines and creating that cathedral-like atmosphere that makes the Black Hills beautiful. Wyatt was in good spirits, talking about a girl he'd been seeing, making plans for Thanksgiving. I was only half listening, my attention on the forest around us. Something felt off, though I couldn't identify what. The bird calls seemed muted. We saw no deer, no elk, none of the usual wildlife you'd expect at this time of day. Just forest, silent and still, watching us pass. Around mid-morning, about 6 miles in, Wyatt noticed it too. He stopped talking mid-sentence and looked around, his hand unconsciously moving to his radio. "It's quiet," he said. "Yeah," I replied, scanning the trees. "Too quiet." "Should we report it?" "Report what?" "That we're not hearing enough birds. Let's get to the campsite first, see what spooked those hunters." We continued, but the silence grew heavier with each mile. The trail climbed steadily, switchbacking up a ridge, and as we gained elevation the trees grew larger, their trunks thick as truck beds, their bark deeply furrowed with age. Some of them had to be 300 years old, maybe older, and many of them bore marks. At first I thought they were just normal tree scars, damage from bears or elk or weather, but as we passed more of them, I realized the marks were too regular, too deliberate. Deep gouges cut into the bark in sets of 3 or 4, running vertically down the trunks from about 8 feet up to shoulder height. The cuts were fresh in some cases, old and scarred over in others. Something had been marking these trees for a long time, establishing territory in a way that made my skin crawl. "Bear?" Wyatt asked, touching one of the marks. I shook my head. Wrong pattern. Bears leave marks more spread out, random. These are deliberate, and too high. Even a standing grizzly doesn't reach 8 feet. So what made them? I didn't answer because I didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound insane. The marks looked like they'd been made by hands, by fingers. 3 or 4 of them dragged down the bark with enough force to cut through to the sapwood. But the spacing was wrong for human hands. Too wide. Too long. We documented the marks with photos and GPS coordinates, per protocol, and moved on. The hunter's campsite was another 2 miles ahead, in a clearing near a spring that the maps called Whisper Creek. The name suddenly felt ominous. We reached the site around noon. The campsite was a disaster. The hunters had left in a hurry, that much was obvious. Gear was scattered everywhere, food supplies torn open and scattered, one tent collapsed and partially shredded. But what caught my attention immediately was the smell. That same smell the hunter had described, decay mixed with something chemical, like ammonia and rot combined. It hung heavy in the clearing, making my eyes water. "Jesus," Wyatt breathed, covering his nose with his sleeve. "What died?" We searched the campsite carefully, documenting everything. The hunters had been using this spot for several days based on the amount of gear and the condition of their fire pit. Something had torn through their camp violently, shredding the tent, scattering supplies, leaving tracks everywhere, and the tracks made no sense. They were large, much larger than any human footprint, roughly foot-shaped but elongated, with what looked like 5 distinct toe impressions at the front. Some of them were clear enough that I could see what might have been claw marks at the toe tips. The stride length between prints was enormous, at least 6 feet. Whatever made these tracks was massive and bipedal. "Mountain lion?" Wyatt suggested, but his voice carried no conviction. "Mountain lions are quadrupeds. These are walking on 2 legs. And look at the size. These prints are at least 16 inches long." Wyatt knelt beside one of the clearer prints, taking photos with his phone and placing his hand next to it for scale. His hand looked tiny in comparison. He looked up at me, and I saw real fear in his eyes for the first time. "Hunter, what are we looking at here?" Before I could answer, my radio crackled. It was Emily Rodriguez, our dispatcher back at the station. "Ranger James, checking in. Status report, over." I keyed my radio. "We're at the hunter's campsite. Significant disturbance here. Large tracks, unknown origin. Camp appears to have been ransacked. Recommend we document and return for analysis with a larger team, over by Sem." "Copy that. Document and return. Be advised, Weather Service is tracking a front moving in this afternoon. You'll want to be back on the main trail before dark. Over." "Understood. James out." I turned to Wyatt. "Let's finish documenting this site and get moving. I don't want to be up here after dark." We spent another hour taking photos, collecting samples of the torn tent fabric, making plaster casts of the clearest footprints. The smell never dissipated, and several times I caught myself scanning the tree line, certain I was being watched. The forest remained silent, oppressively so, as if every living thing had fled the area. We were packing up our equipment when Wyatt froze, staring at something beyond the edge of the clearing. "Hunter," he said quietly, "look at that tree." I followed his gaze to a large ponderosa pine about 30 yards away. Something hung from one of its branches, about 15 feet up. At first, I thought it was laundry, fabric flapping in the breeze. Then my brain processed what I was actually seeing, and my blood went cold. It was skin, animal hide of some kind, stretched out and hung from the branch like a grotesque flag. As we approached, I could see it was relatively fresh, the flesh side still pink in places, the fur side matted and dark. It took me a moment to identify what animal it had come from because the hide had been skinned in a way that didn't match any normal field dressing technique. "Is that a deer?" Wyatt asked. "I think so, but look at how it's been removed. A hunter would skin it differently, wouldn't hang it like this. And look at the cuts. I pointed to the edges of the hide. Instead of clean knife cuts, the skin appeared to have been torn away in places, ripped from the carcass with tremendous force. Some of the tears showed what might have been tooth marks. "This is a trophy," I said, understanding dawning with a sick certainty. "Whatever made those tracks, it's marking its territory. The tree scratches, the hide, all of it. This is its hunting ground, and it's warning other predators off." "Other predators like us," Wyatt said. "Yeah, like us." We backed away from the tree, both of us unconsciously unslinging our rifles and checking that they were loaded. I carried a Remington 870 shotgun loaded with slugs, standard issue for rangers in bear country. Wyatt had a rifle, a Marlin 45-70, that could drop a grizzly at close range. They were powerful weapons, meant to stop the largest predators in North America. But looking at those massive tracks, at that hanging hide, I wasn't sure they would be enough. "We're leaving," I said. "Now, we've documented enough." We shouldered our packs and started back down the trail, moving faster than we'd come up, neither of us speaking. The silence of the forest felt different now, not peaceful but predatory, as if the trees themselves were watching, waiting. I checked my watch, 2 in the afternoon. We had maybe 5 hours of daylight left. If we pushed hard, we could be back to the trailhead by dusk. We'd covered maybe 2 miles when we heard it, a sound that stopped us both in our tracks. It started low, barely audible, a rumbling vocalization that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then it rose in pitch and volume, becoming a scream, a roar, a sound that had no comparison in any animal I'd ever heard. It echoed off the ridges, seeming to come from multiple directions, and it went on for what felt like forever but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. When it finally faded, the silence that followed was absolute. Not a bird, not an insect, nothing. "What the hell was that?" Wyatt's voice shook. "I don't know. Keep moving. Faster." We started jogging, our packs bouncing uncomfortably, our breath coming in gasps more from fear than exertion. The trail descended in long switchbacks, and we took them as fast as we dared, occasionally having to slow down where the footing got treacherous on loose rock or exposed roots. We heard the sound again about 20 minutes later, closer this time, much closer. And this time, it was followed by something that made my scalp tingle with primal terror. A voice. Human voice. My voice. "Wyatt," it called from somewhere to our right in the dense forest off the trail. "Wyatt, I need help. I fell. I think my leg is broken." We both stopped, staring in the direction the voice had come from. It sounded exactly like me. Same tone, same inflection, even the slight hoarseness I get when I've been hiking in cold air. But I was standing right here. I hadn't called out. Wyatt looked at me, his face pale. "That was your voice." "Keep moving," I said. "Don't respond to it. Don't acknowledge it. Just move." "Hunter, wait!" The voice called again, and now it had changed slightly, adding a note of pain, of desperation. "Please, I can't move. Something's wrong. Help me." Every instinct screamed at me to respond, to help my partner who was calling for aid. But my partner was right here beside me, his hand gripping my arm, both of us understanding on some level that we were hearing something impossible, something that had learned to mimic human speech with perfect accuracy. "Run," I said. "Run now." We ran. Not jogging anymore, but full-out running, abandoning any pretense of caution, just trying to put distance between us and whatever had called out in my stolen voice. Behind us, I could hear crashing in the undergrowth, something large moving through the forest parallel to the trail, keeping pace with us despite the dense vegetation that should have slowed it down. The voice called out again, and this time it had changed to Wyatt's voice. "Hunter, stop. We need to think about this. We need to make a plan." I grabbed Wyatt's jacket to keep him moving. "Don't listen. It's not me. I'm right here." "I know," he gasped. "But how is it doing that?" I had no answer. We kept running, our legs burning, our lungs screaming, until finally we burst out of the dense tree cover into a more open area of mixed pine and aspen. The trail leveled out here, following a ridge line, and we could see for a reasonable distance in most directions. We slowed to a fast walk, both of us checking behind us constantly, weapons ready. For several minutes, nothing happened. The crashing in the undergrowth had stopped. No more voices called out, just the sound of our harsh breathing and our boots on the packed dirt of the trail. "Maybe we lost it," Wyatt said hopefully, "or maybe it's waiting for dark." I replied, checking my watch. 3:30. Still an hour or more of good light, then twilight, then darkness. We were still at least 8 miles from the trailhead. We weren't going to make it before dark. I pulled out my radio and tried to call the station. Static. I tried again, checked the battery, adjusted the frequency. Nothing but static across all channels. The radio was working. I could hear the electronic hiss, but something was interfering with transmission. Satellite phone, I said, pulling it from my pack. Every ranger carried one for emergencies, hardened units that could connect anywhere on Earth with clear line of sight to the sky. I powered it on, waited for it to acquire satellites. The signal indicator climbed to full strength. I dialed the ranger station emergency line. Static, just like the radio. That's not possible, Wyatt said, looking at the phone's display. Full signal. It should work. Nothing about this makes sense, I replied, putting the phone away. We're on our own until we're back in normal radio range. We continued moving, taking advantage of the open terrain to maintain a quick pace. The sun was dropping toward the western horizon, and the temperature was dropping with it. My breath steamed in the cold air. I thought about the weather front Emily had mentioned, wondered if we'd be dealing with snow on top of everything else. As twilight began to settle over the forest, we reached a small clearing with a single standing structure. One of the old Forest Service cabins built back in the 1930s as shelters for rangers on long patrol. Most of them were barely standing anymore, but this one looked relatively intact. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges, and several window panes were broken, but the roof appeared sound. We should keep moving, Wyatt said. Get as close to the trailhead as possible. In the dark, on this terrain, with that thing out there, we'd break our necks or walk right into it. Better to hole up somewhere defensible, wait for dawn, then make a run for it in daylight. Wyatt didn't like it, but he couldn't argue with the logic. We approached the cabin carefully, weapons ready, and I kicked the door fully open and checked inside. Empty. Single room, maybe 15 by 15 feet, with a stone fireplace on one wall, a wooden bunk frame in the corner, and not much else. Thick dust covered everything, and animal droppings suggested frequent visits from mice and pack rats. But no sign of recent human use or anything larger. We dragged our packs inside, and I examined the door. The hinges were rusted but functional. The latch was broken, but we could bar it from inside using a thick branch Wyatt found outside. The windows worried me, the broken panes giving access to anything that wanted in. But they were small and high on the walls, more for ventilation than light. We used duct tape and garbage bags from our packs to cover the broken window panes, sealing the cabin as much as possible. Then we inventoried our supplies. Food for 3 days, water purification tablets and bottles, first aid kit, emergency shelter and fire starting materials. Ammunition. I had 15 shotgun slugs remaining. Wyatt had 18 rifle rounds. If it came to a fight, we'd have to make every shot count. As darkness fell completely, we decided against building a fire. The smoke would advertise our location, and we didn't know what might be drawn to it. Instead, we broke a series of chemical glow sticks, the kind used for emergency lighting, and placed them around the cabin. The green glow was barely adequate for seeing by, but it would have to do. We ate cold meals from our packs and took turns on watch, 2-hour shifts. I took the first shift, sitting with my back to the wall near the door, shotgun across my lap. Wyatt tried to sleep on the bunk frame, but I could tell from his breathing that he wasn't having much success. "Hunter," he said after a while. "What did we see up there? What is that thing?" "I don't know." "But you have theories." I did have theories. I'd been a ranger long enough to hear the stories, the whispered accounts that older rangers told over campfires or late-night radio watches. Stories about the skinwalker, about things that walked like men but weren't men, that could take on the appearance and voice of anyone they'd seen. Lakota legends spoke of them, stories passed down through generations about evil shamans who wore the hides of animals and gained their abilities, who could shift between forms, who hunted humans for sport or revenge. I'd always dismissed those stories as folklore, cultural mythology that grew naturally from the isolation and darkness of wilderness places. But after hearing my own voice calling from the forest, after seeing those impossible tracks and that hanging hide, I wasn't dismissing anything anymore. "The Lakota have stories," I said carefully, "about things that live in the Black Hills, things that can change their shape, take on the appearance of animals or people. They called them skinwalkers, or sometimes Yi Nald Lushi, though that's more properly a Navajo term. The concept exists in a lot of Native American traditions, though. Something evil that wears stolen skins and mimics the living. You're saying what? We're being hunted by some kind of shapeshifter? A werewolf? I'm saying I don't know what we're dealing with, but it's intelligent, it's territorial, and it's deliberately trying to terrorize us. That vocalization we heard, that was a threat display. The mimicry, trying to separate us, that's hunting behavior. This thing, whatever it is, has been doing this for a long time. The tree marks, the hide trophy, this is established territory. We walked into its hunting ground and it sees us as either prey or rivals. So what do? We survive until morning. Then we get the hell out of here and report this. Let someone else with more resources and more firepower figure out what's going on. Wyatt fell silent, processing this. Outside the cabin, the night was absolute, the darkness complete. No moon, clouds having rolled in with the approaching weather front. I could hear wind moving through the pines, the creaking of tree branches, small animal sounds in the distance, normal forest noises. But underneath it, or perhaps in between it, something else, a sense of presence, of being watched. Around 11 p.m., during my second watch shift, I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, circling the cabin. They moved around the perimeter slowly, stopping occasionally, and when they stopped I could hear breathing. Deep, labored breathing that sounded almost human, but not quite. The rhythm was wrong. The depth was wrong, like listening to someone breathe through a distorted recording. I woke Wyatt with a hand over his mouth to keep him quiet. He sat up immediately, reaching for his rifle, and I pointed toward the wall. We both listened as the footsteps continued their circuit, sometimes scraping against the log walls, sometimes stopping to sniff audibly at the sealed windows. Then the voice started. Wyatt's voice this time, speaking from just outside the door. "Hunter, I'm freezing out here. Can you let me in? I need to get warm." Neither of us moved. The voice continued, taking on a pleading tone. "Come on, man, don't leave me out here. It's cold. I'm sorry I ran off. I got scared, but I found my way back. Please open the door." Wyatt gripped his rifle so hard his knuckles were white. His lips moved, forming words. "That's not me." I nodded. The thing outside was trying the same trick it had used on the trail, attempting to use a familiar voice to get us to lower our defenses, to open that door. The voice changed, became my voice. "Wyatt, I'm ordering you to open this door. We're partners. You trust me, right? Open the door, and we'll figure this out together." Still, we didn't move. The door bar held firm. After several minutes of this, the voice stopped. The footsteps resumed, moving around the cabin, and then suddenly, there was a tremendous impact against the door. The whole cabin shook. Another impact, and another, something massive throwing its weight against the wooden door. The bar we'd set cracked but held. The hinges screamed in protest but didn't fail. Then it stopped. Silence. We waited, weapons trained on the door, but nothing else happened. Minutes passed, then an hour. The entity, whatever it was, had withdrawn, or was waiting for us to drop our guard. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. We sat back to back in the center of the cabin, weapons ready, watching all the windows and the door, listening to every sound. Several times we heard movement outside, sometimes close, sometimes distant. Once, around 3 a.m., we heard that terrible roar again, echoing off the ridges, a sound of rage and frustration that made every primitive instinct scream at us to run. Dawn came as a gradual lightening of the sky visible through the gaps in our improvised window coverings. We waited until full daylight before removing the door bar and cautiously opening the door. The clearing outside was empty, but in the soft dirt near the cabin steps were tracks, fresh tracks. Dozens of them, all enormous, all showing that distinctive five-toed shape. Something had circled the cabin repeatedly during the night, testing our defenses, looking for a way in. On the door itself were scratches, deep gouges in the wood similar to the marks we'd seen on the trees. 4 parallel lines cut deep, showing where it had tried to claw its way through. "Jesus Christ," Wyatt breathed. "It was right there all night. And the cabin kept it out," I said. "The door held. Whatever this thing is, it has limits. It's strong, but not strong enough to break through solid construction. And it's cautious. It tests defenses rather than charging blindly. Intelligent, Wyatt said. Very intelligent. We quickly broke camp, packed our gear, and started moving. The trail was clear in daylight, and we made good time despite our exhaustion. We didn't talk much, just focused on putting distance between us and that cabin, between us and the Devil's Gateway Valley. Around mid-morning, maybe 5 miles from the trailhead, we heard the sound again, that roar, that impossible vocalization. But this time it came from ahead of us, from the direction we were traveling. We stopped, exchanging looks of horror. It had circled around somehow, gotten ahead of us. It wasn't just following us anymore, it was hurting us. Off trail, I said. We'll cut cross-country, work our way around it. That'll take hours longer, and the terrain is rough. Better than walking into an ambush. We left the trail, pushing into the dense forest, climbing over deadfall and through thick undergrowth. The going was slow and exhausting, and several times we had to backtrack when we hit terrain that was impossible to cross. All the while, we heard sounds around us, movement in the forest, breaking branches, that labored breathing. It was tracking us, matching our pace, and we couldn't see it through the dense vegetation. Midday came and went. We stopped briefly to rest and drink water, our supplies running low. Wyatt's face was drawn with exhaustion and fear. My own hands were shaking from adrenaline and fatigue. We'd been running on pure survival instinct for nearly 24 hours, and our bodies were starting to shut down. "We're not going to make it," Wyatt said quietly. "Are we?" "Yes, we are. The trailhead is only about 3 miles that direction." I pointed southeast, using my compass to check our bearing. "Maybe 2 hours of hard hiking. We can do this." "Hunter, that thing has been hurting us. What if it's driving us somewhere specific? What if we're going exactly where it wants us to go?" I'd been thinking the same thing, but I couldn't see an alternative. We couldn't stay in the forest indefinitely. We had to reach the trailhead, reach civilization, get help. So we kept moving, every step taking us deeper into whatever trap might be waiting. The attack came without warning. We were working our way down a steep slope, using trees for handholds, when Wyatt suddenly screamed. Something had grabbed his pack from behind and yanked him backward with tremendous force. He flew up the slope, his rifle flying from his hands, and disappeared into the thick spruce growth above us. "Wyatt!" I spun around, bringing my shotgun up, but I couldn't see anything. Just trees and shadows and the thrashing as Wyatt fought against something I couldn't see. His screaming intensified, high and terrified, and then suddenly cut off. Not gradually, instantly, like a switch had been flipped. I charged up the slope, abandoning all caution, crashing through the vegetation toward where he'd disappeared. I found his pack first, shredded and empty, the straps torn like tissue paper. Then his rifle, the stock broken, the barrel bent at an impossible angle. Then blood, so much blood, splattered across the ground and the tree trunks, bright red and fresh. And then I saw it. The creature stood in a small clearing about 20 yards ahead, and for the first time I got a clear view. It stood upright on 2 legs, easily 8 feet tall, maybe 9. Its body was covered in a patchwork of different hides, animal skins stitched or tied together in a grotesque mockery of clothing. Deer hide across the torso. What looked like elk skin on the legs. Patches of what might have been coyote or wolf fur covering the arms. And the head, God help me, the head wore a mask made from a human face, skin stretched over something underneath, the features distorted and wrong, the eyes hollow pits that nonetheless seemed to stare with terrible intelligence. In its hands, its 2 long hands that ended in yellowish claws, it held Wyatt, or what was left of Wyatt. His body had been torn open from throat to belly, his organs spilling out, his head hanging at an angle that meant his neck was broken. The creature held him casually, almost gently, examining its kill with what seemed like curiosity. Then it looked at me, made eye contact through those hollow eye pits of its mask, and it smiled. I saw the face skin stretch and twist as the thing underneath moved, revealing teeth, so many teeth, more than any human mouth should hold, pointed and stained. It dropped Wyatt's body carelessly and took a step toward me, its motion fluid despite its size, moving with a horrible grace that suggested complete confidence. This was its territory. It had hunted here for longer than I could imagine, and I was just another prey animal, running and scared, about to be added to its collection. I raised my shotgun and fired. The slug hit its center mass, and I saw the impact, saw the hide clothing tear, saw dark blood spray. But it didn't fall. didn't even stagger. It just kept coming, moving faster now, covering ground with enormous strides. I fired again and again, pumping and shooting, the shotgun bucking against my shoulder, the sound deafening in the confined space. Some shots hit, tearing chunks from its patchwork hide, exposing skin underneath that was gray and leathery. Some shots missed as the creature dodged with impossible speed, weaving between trees. My shotgun clicked empty. 15 slugs. Gone. The creature was maybe 10 yards away now, and I could smell it. That same smell from the campsite. Decay and ammonia and something else. Something wrong. I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard it roar, that sound I'd heard before but 1,000 times worse up close, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my chest cavity and turn my guts to water, then crashing as it gave chase, and I knew I couldn't outrun it, knew this was where I died, in these mountains, torn apart like Wyatt, another mystery disappearance that would never be explained. The slope dropped away suddenly, and I was falling, tumbling down a steep embankment, bouncing off trees and rocks, my pack tearing open and scattering supplies. I hit the bottom hard, landing in a rocky creek bed, my left arm exploding in pain that meant something was broken. I scrambled to my feet, cradling my useless arm, and looked up. The creature stood at the top of the embankment, 15 feet above, looking down at me. It was bleeding from multiple wounds, but it showed no sign of being seriously injured. It began to climb down, moving carefully, and I realized with sick certainty that it was taking its time. Playing with me, savoring the hunt. The creek, moving water. I was standing in a shallow stream that cut through the rocks, maybe 6 inches deep, flowing fast. And I remembered something from those old Lakota stories my grandfather had told me when I was a child. Skinwalkers couldn't cross running water. It was one of the few protections against them, along with certain sacred plants and salt. It was folklore, superstition, but I had nothing else left. I waded into the creek, moving downstream as fast as I could while maintaining my footing on the slick rocks. My arms screamed with every movement, but I forced myself to keep going, splashing through the water, putting distance between me and the creature. It reached the bottom of the embankment and paused at the creek's edge. Stood there, that terrible masked face tilted as if considering. Then it stepped forward, 1 foot entering the water, and screamed. Not a roar this time, but a scream of genuine pain and rage. It jerked its foot back like the water had burned it, and I saw smoke rising from where the water had touched its skin. The creature backed away from the creek, pacing along the bank, and I could feel its hatred, its fury, radiating from it in waves. But it didn't cross. Couldn't cross. I kept moving downstream, my vision starting to blur from shock and pain. The creek widened and deepened, becoming a legitimate stream. I followed it blindly, knowing only that as long as I stayed in the water, the creature couldn't reach me. Time became meaningless. I might have walked for an hour or 3 hours. I couldn't tell. My arm had gone numb, probably not a good sign. I was shaking uncontrollably, hypothermia setting in from the cold water. But I kept moving, 1 foot in front of the other, following the stream. Finally, through the trees ahead, I saw light, open space, and heard the most beautiful sound in the world. A car engine. I stumbled out of the forest onto a paved road, the main highway that ran through the Black Hills. A truck was approaching, and I staggered into the middle of the road, waving my good arm frantically. The truck screeched to a stop, and a man jumped out, his face going pale as he saw me. "Jesus Christ, what happened to you?" I tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. I collapsed, and everything went black. I woke up in a hospital in Rapid City. Broken arm, 3 cracked ribs, severe hypothermia, shock, and dehydration. They told me I'd been incoherent when they brought me in, babbling about monsters and creatures and my partner being killed. They'd sent search and rescue teams into the North Sector, looking for Wyatt. After 4 days of intensive searching, they'd found nothing. No body, no blood, no signs of struggle. It was like he'd simply vanished. They found me in the creek 5 miles from the nearest marked trail, soaking wet and nearly frozen. They couldn't explain how I'd gotten there or what had happened to me. The official report listed it as a probable bear attack, with me escaping and Wyatt being carried off. The fact that his body was never found was attributed to the size of the search area and the possibility that scavengers had scattered his remains. I tried to tell them the truth. I told everyone who would listen about the creature, about the tracks, about the voice mimicry, and the patchwork hide clothing, and the way it had torn Wyatt apart. They nodded sympathetically and increased my pain medications. When I persisted, they brought in a psychiatrist who talked about trauma-induced delusions and the brain's need to rationalize traumatic events by creating fantasy narratives. Nobody believed me. Nobody except one person. On my 5th day in the hospital, an old Lakota man visited me. He said his name was Thomas Ironcloud, and he was a member of the tribal council. He sat beside my bed and listened while I told him everything, not interrupting once. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "The Yi Nald Lushi," he finally said. "The one who walks on all fours. My grandfather saw one when he was a young man, hunting in those same hills. It killed 2 men in his hunting party before they could escape. The elders performed ceremonies to bind it, to contain it to certain areas. But ceremonies fade when the people who remember them die, and boundaries fail when they're not maintained." "You believe me?" I said, almost crying with relief. "Of course I believe you. My people have known about these things for generations. We tried to warn the whites when they first came to the Black Hills, but they didn't listen. They called our stories primitive superstitions. They logged the forest and built trails and sent people into places that should have been left alone. And now the old things are angry. The boundaries have been crossed too many times. What do I do? Wyatt is dead. That thing killed him, and nobody will believe me. They think I'm crazy." "You survive," Thomas said. "You carry his memory, and you stay out of the North Sector. The tribe is working with the Forest Service to close those trails permanently. We're citing archaeological and cultural sensitivity, ancient burial grounds that need protection. It's not the whole truth, but it's truth enough. Those areas will be restricted, kept wild. Maybe that will be enough to keep the Yi Nald Lushi contained. And if it's not? If it comes out of the forest? If it starts hunting closer to populated areas? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But these creatures are territorial. As long as humans respect the boundaries, stay out of the deep places, it should remain where it is. It's when people push too far, go too deep, that the old things respond." He stood to leave, then paused. "Your partner, Wyatt. He died protecting these mountains in a way. His death wasn't meaningless. It reminded us that there are still wild places in this world, places that belong to older things, and we ignore that truth at our peril. Remember him, honor him, but don't go looking for revenge. You can't kill what's already dead, and you can't fight what's been here since before we named the stars." Thomas left, and I never saw him again, but his words stayed with me. They discharged me a week later. The Ranger Service offered me extended leave, counseling, full benefits while I recovered. My supervisor quietly suggested that maybe I should consider a transfer, somewhere far from the Black Hills, somewhere with less history. I agreed. 6 weeks later, I was working at a national recreation area in Kansas, flat grasslands with no mountains, no deep forest, no shadows where ancient things might hide. But I can't forget. I dream about it every night, about that moment when the creature looked at me through its stolen face mask and smiled. I see Wyatt's death over and over, hear his screams cut short. And I wonder how many others have died in those mountains. How many disappearances have been attributed to accidents or animal attacks when the truth is so much worse. The North Sector remains closed. The official reason is archaeological sensitivity and trail damage. But rangers who've worked the Black Hills for years know better. We don't talk about it openly, but we all follow certain rules now. We travel in groups of 3 minimum in the backcountry. We maintain constant radio contact. We don't investigate unusual tracks or vocalizations alone. We carry more firepower than regulations technically require. And we never, ever go into the Devil's Gateway area, no matter what reports we receive. Because some places aren't meant for humans. Some territories belong to things that were here first, things that remember when the Black Hills were truly wild, before roads and trails and ranger stations. Things that wear stolen skins and speak with borrowed voices and hunt with an intelligence that makes them more terrifying than any natural predator. The Lakota were right. They tried to tell us, but we didn't listen until it was too late, until good men like Wyatt Turner paid the price for our arrogance. I'm writing this account not because I expect people to believe me. Most won't. They'll read it and dismiss it as fiction, as the delusions of a traumatized ranger trying to make sense of a tragic accident. But some will believe. Some will read this and remember their own encounters, their own unexplained experiences in the deep woods. And maybe, just maybe, some will think twice before heading off trail into restricted areas, before pushing deeper into wilderness that clearly doesn't want them there. Wyatt died because we didn't respect those boundaries, because we thought we had dominion over every corner of the natural world, that our authority as rangers extended into all places regardless of what might already be living there. We were wrong, and he paid for our hubris. I carry his memory every day. I honor him by staying away from the Black Hills, by respecting the territories we should never have entered, and I warn others, through this account, through any means I can. There are old things in those mountains, ancient things, things that wear skins and steal voices and hunt with a patience that measures time in centuries rather than days. The Lakota called them Yi Naldlushi, skinwalkers, but names don't capture what they truly are. They're the price of the wild, the guardians of the deep places, the reminder that humans are not the apex of creation, and they're still there, in the Devil's Gateway, in the old-growth forests where the ponderosa pines grow thick and the granite ridges cut the sky. Still hunting, still waiting, still protecting their territory with a savagery that civilized minds can't comprehend. So heed this warning. Stay out of the North Sector. Respect the closures. Don't go off trail in the restricted areas. And if you hear your own voice calling from the tree line, if you see tracks that make no sense, if you smell that combination of decay and ammonia and wrongness, turn around immediately and run. Because the protocol exists for a reason, and those of us who've survived encounters with what enforces it will carry the scars, visible and invisible, for the rest of our lives. Wyatt Turner deserved better than the death he received. He deserved to come home, to live his life, to see that girl he'd been dating and make those Thanksgiving plans. Instead, he's gone. His body never recovered, his death officially listed as a probable bear attack. His family will never know the truth. They'll never understand what really took their son, their brother, from them. But I know, and I'll remember, and I'll keep telling this story until someone in authority listens, until someone takes the threat seriously enough to protect people from walking blindly into territory that should remain forbidden. The forest keeps its secrets, but this secret has claimed too many lives. This secret needs to be told. Consequences be damned. My name is Hunter James. I was a ranger at Black Hills National Forest, and I survived an encounter with something that shouldn't exist but does. This is my testimony, my warning, my confession. May God have mercy on anyone who ignores it. The Black Hills stand ancient and implacable, harboring mysteries we're not meant to understand, protecting secrets that predate our species. The Yi Naldlushi walks there still, wearing its stolen skins, speaking with its borrowed voices, hunting in the deep places where the old trees grow and the shadows never fully lift. Respect the boundaries, honor the warnings, remember the dead, and stay out of the North Sector, because the protocol exists for a reason. And I pray you never have to learn that reason the way Wyatt Turner and... I've worked Sequoia National Forest for 17 years, and I can tell you exactly how many people go missing on the giant forest trail. What I can't tell you, what I'm not allowed to tell you, is where they actually go. My name is Graven Wood, and I am the senior ranger for the Northern District of Sequoia National Forest. 17 years of walking among trees that were ancient when Rome fell. 17 years of search and rescue operations. 17 years of telling myself that the disappearances had rational explanations, that the massive footprints we found were deformed bear tracks, that the vocalizations echoing through the sequoia groves at night were just elk or mountain lions, that the territorial markers carved into bark 8 feet off the ground were made by someone with a ladder and too much time. I stopped believing my own lies 3 months ago when we found what was left of the Henderson family. It was late August, peak season, when the forest fills with tourists eager to stand beneath trees that tower over 300 feet tall. The Hendersons were from Ohio, father, mother, 2 kids aged 9 and 12. They had permits for a 3-day backcountry camping trip in the Redwood Mountain Grove, one of the more remote areas where the big trees grow so dense that even at midday, the forest floor exists in permanent twilight. They were experienced hikers, well-equipped, careful. They checked in at the ranger station, filed their itinerary, did everything right. They were supposed to check out on a Tuesday. When they didn't show up by Wednesday afternoon, I sent Jax, Ridge, and Rockland Hart to investigate. Jax was my best tracker, a wiry 30-year-old who had grown up in these mountains and could read a trail like most people read a book. Rockland was older, mid-40s, built like a bear himself with hands that could crush walnuts. Between them, they had 40 years of combined experience in Sequoia. They found the Henderson campsite on Thursday morning. The tents were shredded, fabric hanging in strips from bent poles, sleeping bags torn open, feathers and synthetic fill scattered across the ground like snow. The food locker had been ripped apart, its steel door bent completely backward, hinges snapped. But that wasn't what made Jax radio me with a voice that shook so badly I could barely understand him. It was the trees. The sequoias surrounding the campsite were marked. Deep gouges carved into bark that was sometimes 2 feet thick, running from 10 feet up down to ground level. 4 parallel grooves, each one wide enough to fit 3 fingers inside. The marks were fresh, sap still oozing, the white wood beneath exposed and raw. Whatever made those marks had incredible strength and claws like nothing that should exist in California. I drove out there with a team of 6 rangers and 2 county sheriffs. The road took us as far as the Heart Tree trailhead. Then we hiked in 4 miles through forest so old and thick it felt like walking through a cathedral built by something far older than humanity. The sequoias here were giants among giants, some of them over 30 feet in diameter, their lowest branches starting 100 feet above our heads. Between them grew sugar pines and incense cedars, and the understory was thick with dogwood and mountain misery that filled the air with a sharp medicinal scent. The silence hit me first. In 17 years, I had never heard Sequoia this quiet. No Stellar's jays calling, no squirrels chattering, no woodpeckers hammering. Just our boots on the trail, and our breathing, and a silence so complete it felt like the forest was holding its breath. We reached the Henderson site around noon. Jax and Rockland had secured the area, but hadn't touched anything, waiting for us. The destruction was even worse than the radio call had suggested. It looked like something had gone through the camp in a rage, tearing apart everything the family owned. Clothes were scattered and shredded. The camping stove was crushed flat. A hiking boot sat in the middle of the clearing, the leather torn as if something had tried to rip it apart with its teeth. But no bodies, no blood, no sign of the family except for their destroyed belongings. Sheriff Tom Braddock circled the campsite slowly, his hand resting on his weapon. "Graven," he said quietly. "What the hell did this? A bear?" I pointed to the marks on the trees. "Look at the spacing on those gouges. Look at the height they start from. No bear in California is that big. No bear has claws spaced that far apart. Mountain lion?" I shook my head. "Lions don't do this. They don't destroy campsites. They ambush, they kill, they drag the body away. They don't tear through steel lockers and shred tents for no reason. Then what?" I didn't answer because I didn't have an answer I was willing to say out loud. Not yet. Not without more evidence. Rockland was examining the ground at the edge of the clearing. "Graven," he called, "you need to see this." I walked over. The soil here was soft, decades of decomposed sequoia needles creating a layer of duff that took prints beautifully. And there were prints, dozens of them, footprints that made my blood run cold. They were massive, easily 18 inches long and 7 inches wide at the ball of the foot. 5 toes clearly visible, each one tipped with what looked like a claw mark. The arch was high, the heel deep. They looked almost human in shape, but scaled up to impossible size. Whatever made these prints stood upright and walked on 2 legs and weighed enough to sink 3 inches into soft ground with each step. The prints led away from the campsite deeper into the forest, heading northwest towards some of the most remote areas of Sequoia. There was a clear trail of them, purposeful, not wandering. Something had walked into this camp, destroyed it, and walked out. And from the size of those prints, it had carried a lot of weight when it left. "We need to follow them," Jax said, his voice tight. The family could still be alive. I looked at the prints, at the destroyed camp, at those gouges in the trees. Every instinct screamed at me that following those tracks was a terrible idea. But Jax was right. We had a duty to search. 4 people were missing. We had to try. I divided us into 2 teams. I would lead Jax, Rockland, and Deputy Sarah Chen following the tracks. The others would stay at the campsite, document everything, and maintain radio contact. We had 5 hours of daylight left. If we didn't find the family by dusk, we would return to the campsite and continue the search in the morning with more personnel. We followed the prints northwest. They led us off any established trail into old-growth forest that few people ever saw. The sequoias here were ancient behemoths, their trunks wider than roads, their crowns so high above us they seemed to touch the sky. Between them grew century-old sugar pines, and firs that would have been considered massive trees anywhere else but here seemed almost small in comparison. The tracks were easy to follow. Whatever made them hadn't tried to hide its trail. We found broken branches at head height, my head height, which meant 7 feet up. We found more marks on trees, territorial markers that grew more frequent the deeper we went. And we found something else, scat. Enormous piles of feces containing what looked like digested plant matter, berries, and small bones. I collected a sample in an evidence bag, trying not to think about how large the animal would have to be to produce scat that size. We had been hiking for maybe 2 hours when Rockland stopped suddenly. "Listen," he whispered. We all froze. At first I heard nothing. Then, faintly, from somewhere ahead, I heard it. A sound that made every hair on my body stand up. Low and resonant, like a foghorn but more organic. It started deep, rose in pitch, then fell again, echoing through the forest. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then silence. "What the hell was that?" Chen breathed. "I don't know," I said, which was a lie. I had heard recordings of that sound before, on late-night cryptozoology shows I watched when I couldn't sleep. But hearing it in person, echoing through the sequoias, knowing something had just made that call somewhere ahead of us, was completely different from hearing it on television. "We should go back," Rockland said. "Whatever made that sound, we're not equipped to deal with it." "The family," Jax insisted. "They could be close. We have to keep looking." I made a decision I would regret for the rest of my life. "We keep going," I said. "But weapons ready. Stay close. Any sign of danger, we retreat immediately." We moved forward more slowly now, our rifles unslung and ready. The forest seemed to press in around us, the sequoias creating walls of bark on either side. The trail led us down into a narrow ravine where a seasonal creek had carved through the landscape. The sound of running water should have been peaceful. Instead, it just masked any other sounds, leaving us blind to what might be approaching. We found the first body at the bottom of the ravine. It was Mr. Henderson, or what was left of him. He was lying face down in the creek, the water running red around him. His back had been opened from shoulder to hip, ribs cracked outward. His spine was visible, gleaming white in the dim light. When we turned him over, his chest cavity was empty. Everything had been removed with surgical precision. Chen turned and vomited. Even Rockland, who I had seen handle everything from bear maulings to climbing accidents, went pale. Jax pulled out his radio to call it in, but all he got was static. The ravine walls were blocking our signal. "We have to get out of here," Rockland said. "Right now. We're in over our heads." But I was looking at Henderson's body, at the precision of the wounds. This wasn't random. This wasn't an animal killing for food or defending territory. This was something else, something deliberate. "Where are the others?" I asked. "His wife, his kids. They have to be nearby." "Graven, we need to leave," Rockland repeated, more urgently. That's when I heard branches breaking, heavy footsteps moving through the undergrowth on the far side of the ravine. I raised my rifle, scanning the trees. The others did the same, forming a circle with our backs together. The footsteps stopped. Silence crashed down, more oppressive than before. We stood there, barely breathing, waiting. My finger was on the trigger, sweat running down my back despite the cool air. Then I saw it. Just a glimpse, a shape moving between two massive sequoias about 50 yards away, tall, at least 8 feet, covered in reddish-brown hair, broad shoulders, arms that hung too long. It paused between the trees, partially hidden in shadow, and I could feel it watching us, could feel the intelligence behind that gaze, calculating, deciding. "Federal Rangers," I called out, my voice sounding weak and small in the vastness of the forest. "Show yourself." The shape tilted its head, almost curious. Then it made a sound. Not the vocalization from before, but something else. A low, guttural clicking, almost like speech, but in no language I had ever heard. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. a complex series of clicks and grunts that seemed to carry meaning. Then it was gone, melting back into the forest with impossible speed and silence. We ran. Discipline and training went out the window. We scrambled up the ravine walls and fled back the way we had come, crashing through undergrowth, not caring about noise or direction. Behind us, I heard that clicking sound again, coming from multiple directions. They were communicating, coordinating, following us. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. Rockland was ahead of me, his size somehow not slowing him down. Chen was right behind, her breathing ragged with panic. Jax brought up the rear, occasionally glancing back, his rifle ready. We burst out of the dense forest into a more open area where the sequoias were spaced further apart. Ahead, I could see the Henderson campsite, the other rangers moving around it. Safety. We were almost there. That's when Jax screamed. I spun around just in time to see him lifted off the ground. Something had grabbed him from behind, a massive hairy arm around his waist. He was 8 feet in the air, kicking and struggling, his rifle falling from his hands. The creature holding him was enormous, easily 9 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the trees behind it. Its face was flat, almost human, but wrong, with a heavy brow ridge and deep-set eyes that glowed amber in the shadows. I fired. The shot hit the creature in the shoulder and it jerked, dropping Jax. He hit the ground hard but immediately started crawling away. The creature looked at its shoulder where dark blood was seeping through the hair, then looked at me. Its lips pulled back, showing teeth that were too large, too sharp. It roared, a sound that shook the air and made my eardrums feel like they would burst. Then it charged. I fired again and again, backing up with each shot. Rockland and Chen were shooting too, our rounds hitting but not stopping it. The creature covered the distance between us with terrifying speed. 20 yards, 10 yards, 5 yards. A shot rang out, louder than our rifles. The creature's head snapped back and it stumbled, crashing to its knees. Another shot, this one hitting its chest. It fell sideways, twitched once, and lay still. I turned to see Sheriff Braddock standing at the edge of the campsite, a hunting rifle still raised to his shoulder. Behind him, the other rangers were frozen, staring at what he had just killed. We stood there, breathing hard, staring at the massive body lying in the dirt. It was real, undeniably, impossibly real. Covered in reddish-brown hair, muscular beyond anything that should exist, with hands that looked almost human but were twice the size. Its feet were massive, exactly matching the prints we had been following. Jesus Christ, Braddock breathed, lowering his rifle. What is that thing? Before I could answer, I heard it. That vocalization again, the deep resonant call. But this time it came from multiple directions, all around us, dozens of them, calling and responding, and they sounded angry. "Move!" I shouted. Back to the vehicles. Now. We grabbed Jax, who was injured but alive, his ribs possibly broken from the fall. We ran, carrying him between us, leaving everything behind. The vocalizations followed us, tracking us through the forest. I caught glimpses of shapes moving parallel to our path. Tall shapes, moving on 2 legs. There were so many of them. We reached the trailhead as the sun was setting. Got Jax into one of the vehicles. The rangers piled into trucks and SUVs. Braddock was the last one in, his rifle still ready, scanning the tree line. As we drove away, I looked back. They were standing at the edge of the forest. At least 15 of them, maybe more. Massive shapes silhouetted against the darkening trees, watching us leave. One of them, larger than the others, raised its arms and made that call again. A warning, a promise, a declaration that this was their territory and we were no longer welcome. We drove in silence back to the ranger station. Nobody spoke. What was there to say? We had just killed something that wasn't supposed to exist, and its family, its tribe, whatever they were, had just watched us do it. The next 24 hours were chaos. State police, FBI, wildlife officials, everyone wanted to know what happened. We told them, showed them photos of the creature Braddock had killed, photos of the tracks, the destroyed campsite, Henderson's body, physical evidence that couldn't be denied. They went back to retrieve the creature's body. It was gone, not dragged away, but carried. The ground showed multiple sets of those massive prints surrounding where it had fallen. They had come for their dead and taken it away. The only proof left was our photos and the plaster casts Rockland had made of the footprints. They found Mrs. Henderson 2 days later, or what was left of her. Same condition as her husband, opened and emptied with surgical precision. The children were never found. Search teams combed the area for weeks. Nothing. Just more prints, more territorial markers, and an oppressive silence that never lifted. The official report was carefully worded. Large unknown primate. Possible surviving population of Gigantopithecus or related species. The area was immediately closed, no public access. The closure was listed as due to unstable terrain and fire danger, but every ranger in Sequoia knew the real reason. We weren't alone in these forests. We had never been alone. We had just been too blind to see it. Jax recovered physically, but mentally he was changed. He requested a transfer to Death Valley, somewhere with no trees, no shadows, no places for things to hide. I approved it without question. Chen quit entirely, moved to San Diego, works for a private security company now. Rockland stayed, but he never goes into the backcountry anymore, just maintains trails near the visitor centers, places where there are always people around. As for me, I became obsessed. I started researching everything I could find about these creatures. Native American legends from the Yokuts and Monarchy tribes spoke of the Hairy Man, a race of giants that lived in the deep forests and would steal people who wandered too far from their villages. Early settlers reported encounters, massive ape-like creatures that walked upright and showed clear intelligence. The stories went back centuries, millennia maybe. I found reports of other incidents in Sequoia and Kings Canyon, disappearances that had been attributed to getting lost or falling from cliffs, but some of them showed the same pattern. Experienced hikers vanishing without a trace. Destroyed campsites, bodies found in impossible conditions. For decades, maybe longer, these things had been taking people, and we had written it off as accidents or bear attacks because the alternative was too disturbing to accept. 3 weeks after the Henderson incident, I received an anonymous package at my home. Inside was a USB drive. On it were dozens of photographs, obviously taken over many years by different cameras. The photos showed the creatures in their natural habitat. Massive individuals sitting in groups, grooming each other. Juveniles playing while adults watched. Tools being used. Rocks selected and shaped for specific purposes. One photograph showed what looked like a burial cairn, carefully stacked stones in a clearing, with massive handprints pressed into the dirt around it. There was also a note, handwritten. The Watchers have been here longer than your maps show, longer than your buildings stand. Respect their territory, and they will tolerate you. Violate it, and they will respond. They have shown restraint. Do not mistake it for weakness. The note was unsigned, but I recognized the handwriting. It belonged to Marcus Whitlow, a ranger who had worked Sequoia in the 1970s and supposedly retired to Oregon. I tried to call him. His number was disconnected. I tried to find him. No records, no address, nothing. It was like he had vanished. But his message was clear. These creatures had been watching us for decades. Watching and waiting, testing our boundaries. The Henderson family had camped too deep in their territory, too close to something important, and they had paid the price. I presented all my findings to the regional director, showed her the evidence, the patterns, the photographs. She listened, expressionless. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Graven, I need you to understand something. We cannot acknowledge what you're describing. The public panic would be catastrophic. Tourism would collapse. Property values around the park would plummet. It would be a disaster." "So we just pretend they don't exist?" I asked. "We establish protocols, expanded closure areas, restrictions on backcountry camping in certain zones, enhanced ranger patrols. We protect people without telling them exactly what we're protecting them from. And when more people disappear, then we investigate thoroughly. We search diligently. And we attribute it to the dangers inherent in wilderness recreation. Because the alternative, telling the public that intelligent hominids are living in our national forests and occasionally kill people, that would destroy everything we've built. The parks, the tourism industry, the myth of wilderness as a safe recreational space. She was right, in a practical sense. The truth would be devastating. But she was also asking me to be complicit in a lie that could cost lives. "I have 3 choices," she continued. "I can believe you're having a breakdown from the trauma of losing the Hendersons. I can fire you for spreading dangerous misinformation, or I can keep you on staff, give you expanded authority to implement new safety protocols, and trust that you'll be discreet about the reasoning behind them. I chose option 3. What else could I do? At least this way, I could try to keep people safe. even if I couldn't tell them exactly what they needed to be safe from. Over the next 2 months, we quietly implemented changes. Entire sections of Sequoia were designated as research areas with no public access. Rangers began patrolling in pairs, never alone. New protocols required anyone camping in the backcountry to carry satellite phones and check in every 6 hours. We increased the presence of armed rangers in remote areas. The changes worked to an extent. Disappearances in Sequoia dropped to nearly zero, but other forests started reporting unusual incidents. Yosemite, Kings Canyon, Sierra National Forest. The creatures weren't confined to Sequoia. They were spread throughout the Sierra Nevada, maybe the entire West Coast. A population of intelligent hominids living parallel to humanity, hidden in the last, truly wild places. I started corresponding with rangers from other parks, people who had their own encounters and were willing to talk quietly, off the record. We shared information, patterns, strategies for keeping people safe without causing panic. We became an informal network of guardians, protecting both species, humans from the creatures, and the creatures from humans. Because that was the other concern. If knowledge of these beings became widespread, there would be hunting parties. Trophy hunters who wanted to bag something truly unique. Scientists who wanted to capture and study them. The military wanting to assess if they posed a threat. The creatures would be hunted to extinction or forced into captivity. Either outcome was unacceptable. So we kept the secret. We filed false reports. We attributed deaths to accidents and animal attacks. We lied to families of the missing, telling them their loved ones probably fell from cliffs or got lost, knowing the truth was so much worse. The guilt of that deception weighs on me every day. But what's the alternative? Start a war with creatures that have lived in these mountains for thousands of years? Drive them out of their last refuges? Put them in zoos for humans to gawk at? None of those options are acceptable. 6 months after the Henderson incident, I was doing a solo patrol near Grant Grove, checking on the closure markers we had installed. It was late afternoon, the sun slanting through the massive sequoias, creating cathedral beams of light, beautiful and peaceful and quiet. Too quiet. I realized I hadn't heard any birds for the last 10 minutes. My hand moved to the rifle slung over my shoulder. That's when I saw it. Standing between 2 giant sequoias about 30 yards away, massive, covered in dark brown hair, watching me. It made no aggressive moves, just stood there, observing. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably less than a minute. Then it made a sound. Not the aggressive vocalization from before, something softer, more complex. A series of grunts and clicks that seemed almost conversational. It gestured with one massive hand, pointing at me, then at the closure markers, then deeper into the forest. The meaning was clear, even without shared language. These markers, this boundary. Good. Keep people out. I nodded slowly, not sure if it would understand the gesture. The creature tilted its head, studying me. Then it made another sound, lower, almost gentle. It placed one hand on its chest, then gestured to the forest behind it. My territory, my family. Then it pointed at me, then toward the direction of the ranger station. Your territory, your family. It was proposing a truce, an acknowledgement of boundaries, respect for each other's space. I placed my hand on my own chest. Graven, I said quietly, not expecting it to understand, but feeling the need to introduce myself. The creature's eyes widened slightly. It made a sound, trying to mimic what I had said. It came out garbled, but the attempt was there. Then it thumped its own chest and made a sound that might have been its name, a deep, rumbling vocalization I couldn't hope to reproduce. We stood there, 2 intelligent beings from different species, attempting communication. Then the creature stepped backward, still facing me, and melted into the forest, gone in seconds, despite its size. I stood there alone, processing what had just happened. It had acknowledged me, had tried to communicate, had proposed, in its own way, a peace treaty. These creatures weren't mindless animals. They were people, different from us, but people nonetheless, with their own societies, their own territories, their own understanding of the world. That encounter changed everything for me. I was no longer just protecting humans from monsters. I was mediating between 2 intelligent species that shared the same environment. It was a responsibility I had never asked for and had no training to handle, but someone had to do it. I never told anyone about that encounter. Not the regional director, not my fellow rangers, not even the informal network of rangers who knew about the creatures. Some moments are too profound, too personal to share. That moment in Grant Grove, that attempted communication, it was mine to carry. Over the next year, I saw them occasionally, always at a distance, always watching. They seemed to understand that I was maintaining the boundaries, keeping people out of their core territory. Several times I found offerings at closure markers, stacked stones arranged in patterns, carefully selected pine cones arranged in circles. Once, a small wooden carving of a sequoia, roughly made but clearly intentional. I took these as signs of approval, acknowledgement that the truce was holding. Not everyone disappeared who violated the boundaries. Most were escorted out, driven away by rock-throwing or intimidating vocalizations. The creatures showed remarkable restraint most of the time, but sometimes, when people pushed too deep, when they got too close to something important, the restraint ended. 2 more campers went missing that year. Both had ignored closure signs, hiked past barriers, deliberately ventured into restricted areas. We found their campsites destroyed, their bodies never recovered. The message was clear: respect the boundaries or face the consequences. I'm writing this now because I'm retiring. 17 years in Sequoia, the last year spent as a secret ambassador between species, has taken its toll. I'm tired. The weight of the lies, the lost people, the knowledge I carry, it's too much. I'm passing this responsibility to someone else, someone younger who might handle it better than I have. But before I go, I need to tell this story. Need to leave a record of what really exists in these forests. Not for the public. They're not ready. Maybe they never will be. But for the rangers who come after me, so they know what they're really protecting, so they understand why the boundaries matter, so they don't make the mistakes I made. To whoever reads this, the creatures in Sequoia National Forest are real. They are intelligent. They have been here far longer than we have. They have shown remarkable patience with our intrusion into their territory. But that patience is not infinite. The boundaries we have established are not arbitrary. They are the difference between coexistence and conflict. Maintain them, respect them, and never, ever forget that we share these mountains with something older and stronger than ourselves, something that tolerates our presence only because we have finally learned to show respect. The Hendersons died because we didn't understand. Jax was nearly killed because we pushed too far. How many others have to die before we accept the truth? Before we acknowledge that wilderness is not ours to claim completely, that there are places we should not go, that there are beings with their own claim to these ancient forests. I have spent the last year of my career filing false reports, lying to families, covering up the truth. The guilt of that will follow me into retirement. But I did it because the alternative was war. War we would win, probably, with our guns and our helicopters and our technology. But at what cost? The extinction of a species that has survived for millennia? The destruction of the last great mystery? The loss of something irreplaceable? I couldn't allow that. None of us could. So we lied. We covered up. We maintained the fiction that people went missing due to accidents and bad luck. And we quietly, carefully established boundaries that both species could live with. It's not a perfect solution. People still die sometimes. Families still lose loved ones and never know the truth. That blood is on my hands, on all our hands. But it's better than the alternative, better than open conflict, better than the extinction of either species. The forest keeps its secrets, and this is the biggest secret of all. In the shadow of the giant sequoias, in the deep groves where sunlight barely penetrates, they live, the first people of these mountains. The giants who were here before maps, before rangers, before the word sequoia meant anything to anyone. They watch us from the shadows. They mark their territory and defend it when necessary. And they wait to see if we can learn to share the world with them. I pray that we can, because if we can't, if we push too far again, they will push back. And when something that strong, that intelligent, that numerous decides it's had enough of humanity, the results will be catastrophic. So please, if you work in these forests, if you patrol these mountains, if you're responsible for the safety of those who visit, remember the Henderson family, remember Jax Ridge's broken ribs, remember all the others who pushed too far and paid the price. Remember that we are not alone here, and act accordingly. The silence of the sequoias holds more than just peace. It holds secrets, It holds warnings. It holds the presence of something watching, always watching, from the shadows between the ancient trees. Listen to that silence, respect it, and never, ever forget what it contains. This is Graven Wood, signing off for the last time as a ranger of Sequoia National Forest. May those who come after me be wiser than I was. May they protect both the people and the creatures. May they maintain the boundaries that keep an uneasy peace. And may they never have to write a report like this. The giants are real. They are watching, and they are waiting to see what we do next. The training manual at Crater Lake has a whole chapter on what to do if you see smoke signals after dark. There hasn't been a native settlement here in over a century. Someone forgot to tell whatever's making those fires. My name is Mason Keller, and I've been a ranger at Redwood National Forest for 8 years. 8 years of towering coast redwoods and misty river valleys, of helping tourists navigate the Avenue of the Giants and rescuing unprepared backpackers from the backcountry. 8 years of telling myself that the warnings from the old-timers were just campfire stories, that the missing persons cases had logical explanations, that the strange symbols carved into trees in the remote sections were just vandalism. I was catastrophically wrong. It started 6 weeks ago when Rafe Donovan transferred to my district. Rafe was one of those rangers who'd worked everywhere, seen everything. 26 years in the service. Postings from Olympic to Big Sur. He was supposed to be my field supervisor for the season, but when he arrived at the Oryx station, something was fundamentally wrong with him. He looked decades older than his 53 years, like something had hollowed him out from within. His hands trembled when he handled equipment, and he categorically refused to patrol alone after sundown. On his 3rd day, Rafe cornered me in the maintenance shed. His voice came out barely above a whisper, urgent and strained. Mason, I need you to swear to something. If I ever disappear, if I don't check in, do not come searching for me past Fern Canyon. You understand me? Don't go beyond that point. I tried to laugh it off, uncomfortable with his intensity. Rafe, you all right? You look like death warmed over. His expression remained granite. I've seen things that make death look merciful. There are sections of Redwood that don't belong to our reality, never did. The Yurok people understood this. That's why certain groves were taboo. We just drew our boundaries right through those forbidden zones and acted like it didn't matter. Before I could respond, the radio crackled with static. We had an emergency. 2 backpackers were 4 hours overdue on the coastal trail. Rafe's face drained of color when he heard their last known position. That's north of Fern Canyon, he said, voice hollow. That's beyond the threshold. We mobilized regardless. Standard search protocol. Rafe insisted on remaining at the command post while I took 2 rangers, Timber Hayes and Grant Morrison, to sweep the trail system. The hike took us nearly 5 hours, pushing deep into sections of Redwood's interior that tourists rarely penetrated. The forest here felt fundamentally different. The redwoods grew so densely that sunlight became theoretical, the canopy creating a perpetual twilight. Even the sound of our footfalls seemed muffled, absorbed by something in the atmosphere itself. We discovered their campsite just as dusk settled in. 2 tents, both sealed. Equipment scattered across the clearing like someone had torn through it in blind panic. But no backpackers, no obvious signs of struggle beyond the chaos. Just silence. The kind of silence that creates a pressure in your skull because it's so absolute, so wrong. No bird song, no insect sounds, nothing living. Timber found the first marking on a massive redwood. Scratches, he called out. Recent ones. Look at how deep these go. I approached and felt my stomach turn over. The gouges in the bark ran deep, easily 4 inches into the wood. 5 parallel lines scoring the trunk from 10 feet up down to shoulder height. The wood beneath was still weeping sap, but the spacing was impossible. No bear possesses claws that elongated or widely spaced, and the angle indicated whatever created them had been standing upright, reaching downward with deliberate force. Grant was checking his GPS unit. We're about 3/4 of a mile past Fern Canyon. Should we continue searching or wait for sunrise? I studied the darkening sky. We had perhaps 45 minutes of usable light remaining. I thought about Rafe's warning, about his trembling hands and haunted demeanor. Then I thought about 2 missing backpackers who might be injured and dying while we hesitated. We proceed, I decided. But we maintain visual contact. Nobody separates. We found the first body 18 minutes later. Male, mid-30s, matching the description of one of the missing backpackers. He was positioned beside a fallen redwood, and initially, it appeared he was sleeping. Then we moved closer and saw what had been done to him. His torso had been opened, ribcage spread wide like architectural supports. The organs were absent, every single one, just an empty cavity where they belonged. But there was minimal blood on the forest floor. It appeared as though something had surgically removed everything and carried it away. Timber turned and vomited violently. Grant grabbed his radio, attempting to call it in, but received only static. "Too deep in the backcountry," he said, voice shaking. "No signal penetration." The light was deteriorating rapidly now. I made the call. "We mark this GPS position. We return to the command post, and we come back with a full recovery team at first light. We're not equipped for this situation." But as we turned to leave, I heard it. A sound emanating from deeper in the forest. Not animal, not human. A low, resonant vocalization that seemed to vibrate through the redwoods themselves. It lasted approximately 7 seconds, then ceased. In the silence that followed, we heard movement. Something large, moving through the undergrowth roughly 60 yards to our east, moving parallel to our position. "Walk," I said quietly. "Don't run. Just walk with purpose." We moved quickly but deliberately back along the trail. The movement in the forest maintained pace with us, always the same distance away, always just beyond clear sight. Occasionally I glimpsed something through the trees, something tall and dark moving between the massive trunks, but each time I looked directly at it, there was nothing visible, just shadows and bark and the dying light. We were approximately 300 yards from Fern Canyon when Grant stopped moving. "I can't," he gasped. "My legs won't respond." I grabbed his arm firmly. "Yes, you can. We're almost there. Just keep moving forward." "No," he said, and there was absolute terror in his voice. "I literally cannot move. Something's preventing me." I looked down and understood what he meant. Grant's boots were sinking into the ground, not like mud or unstable soil. The solid trail was somehow pulling him downward. His feet were already submerged to mid-calf, and as we watched in horror, he sank deeper. The ground made no sound, showed no cracks or disruption. His legs were simply disappearing into solid earth. Timber and I grabbed him, attempting to pull him upward, but it was like fighting against industrial suction. The harder we pulled, the faster he descended. Grant was screaming now, clawing at the ground, at us, at anything within reach. He went down to his thighs, then his waist. That's when I witnessed the expression transform on his face. The terror became something else entirely, something infinitely worse. His eyes went glassy and vacant, and his screaming stopped abruptly. His mouth continued moving, but no sound emerged. Then he smiled. A wide, impossible smile that revealed too many teeth arranged in wrong configurations. "That's not Grant anymore," Timber whispered. He was correct. Whatever was looking out through Grant's eyes wasn't him. Wasn't human. Wasn't anything from our reality. I made a decision that still haunts every sleeping moment. I released my grip. Timber and I backed away as Grant, or the thing wearing Grant's body, sank down to his chest, his neck, his chin. The smile never faltered. Even as the ground consumed his head, I could perceive that terrible smile through the earth, diminishing until it vanished completely. Then the ground was solid again, unmarked, as though nothing had occurred. Timber and I ran. We ran like damnation itself pursued us, crashing through undergrowth, tripping over root systems, not caring about the noise we generated. Behind us, that sound came again, that low, resonant vocalization. But this time it was closer, substantially closer, and beneath it, I heard something else. Laughter, Grant's laughter, but corrupted, too deep, too rhythmic, too similar to that resonant call. We burst through the tree line and splashed across Fern Canyon's shallow stream. The water was glacially cold and barely ankle deep. But the instant we crossed it, everything changed. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. We could hear normal forest sounds again. Wind through branches, water flowing, our own ragged breathing. I turned back to observe the forest we'd just escaped from, and it looked fundamentally wrong. The shadows were too dark, too substantial. The trees on that side of the stream seemed to lean inward, as though observing us with malevolent curiosity. Timber collapsed on the far bank, sobbing. "He's gone. Grant's gone. What in God's name was that? What took him?" I had no answer. We reached the command post 2 hours later, flashlights cutting through darkness, flinching at every sound. Rafe was waiting at the trailhead. When he saw there were only 2 of us, his face collapsed. You crossed Fern Canyon, he said quietly. You went beyond the threshold. We had to. There were missing backpackers. And now there's a missing ranger. Rafe looked at me with those devastated eyes. What did you witness out there? I told him everything. The body with absent organs. The entity that paced us through the forest. Grant sinking into solid ground while something else looked out from behind his eyes. Rafe listened without interruption, his expression growing progressively darker with each detail. When I finished, he remained silent for an extended moment. Then he said, I need to show you something. Come with me. Just you, Mason. Timber, you stay here and try to rest. Take a sedative if necessary. Rafe led me to his quarters, a modest cabin near the primary ranger station. Inside, the walls were covered with maps, photographs, and documents. String connected different points on the maps, creating intricate webs. He saw me staring and said, I've been tracking it for 13 years, ever since my partner vanished in Tongass National Forest. Identical pattern, missing hikers, bodies with organs removed, people vanishing into nothing. Always in the oldest, most primordial sections of forest. Always beyond some natural boundary, a stream, a ridgeline, a particular grove of trees. What is it? Rafe retrieved a leather journal, its pages yellowed with considerable age. This belonged to a ranger named Samuel Winters. He worked redwood in the 1940s. He witnessed what you witnessed. He documented it. He handed me the journal, read the final entry. I opened to the marked page and read Winters' meticulous handwriting. The date was September 22nd, 1947. Have concluded that certain sections of redwood exist in a state of dimensional overlap. They are not fully part of our reality. Something else bleeds through in these locations. The Yurok called it the hungry place. Said it was where the world of flesh and the world of the consuming void intersect. They built their villages strategically, always avoiding these zones. We should have listened. Instead, we constructed trails directly through them. Now it knows we exist here. Now it has learned to hunt us systematically. I looked up at Rafe. You're saying there's a location in Redwood where reality becomes permeable? Where something from elsewhere can reach through? I'm saying there are locations in every ancient forest where the boundaries become thin, where something primordial and ravenous has discovered a method to feed. It takes people, it takes their organs, their memories, their physical forms, and it's been doing this for an incomprehensible length of time. Over the following 2 weeks, I learned more than any person should know. Rafe had compiled reports spanning decades, hundreds of missing persons in national forests nationwide. Patterns of disappearances clustered around specific locations. Bodies discovered in impossible positions or impossible conditions. And always, invariably, that natural boundary. A stream, a ridge, a line in the forest beyond which the fundamental rules changed. We filed official reports, naturally, told a modified truth about Grant, said he'd fallen into a concealed sinkhole, that we'd been unable to recover the body. The lie tasted like poison in my mouth, but Rafe convinced me it was necessary. If we told the complete truth, we'd be labeled insane, probably terminated, and then there would be no one maintaining vigilance, no one preserving the boundaries, no one warning people away. The second body appeared 8 days later, female backpacker, late 20s, one of the original 2 we'd been searching for. She was discovered by a trail maintenance crew working on the south side of Fern Canyon, miles from where she'd vanished. Her body was arranged in a seated position against a redwood facing the trail. Her eyes were open, and inside her chest cavity, where her heart should have been, someone had placed a perfect replica constructed from twisted roots and living moss. It was still beating rhythmically. The medical examiner who examined her called me directly. Mason, I need you to understand something crucial. This woman died at least 10 days ago, but that structure in her chest, that root system, it's alive, it's functioning. I don't know what kind of deranged individual did this, but they created something that violates every principle of biology. I didn't inform him that no human had done this, that what we were confronting was so far beyond human capability that calling it murder felt inadequate. This was something else entirely. This was a message, a demonstration of power and territory. Rafe became consumed by his research. He spent every night analyzing his maps and journals, attempting to find a pattern, a weakness, something exploitable. I found him one morning unconscious at his desk, having marked 23 new disappearances from the past 6 weeks alone, all in the same general vicinity, all beyond Fern Canyon. It's accelerating its activity, he said when I woke him. Something's changed fundamentally. It used to take one person every few months. Now it's hunting almost nightly. Perhaps we disturbed something when we expanded that trail system last spring. Perhaps we pushed too deeply into its territory. So what do? Close the entire area? And tell them what? That there's an entity in Redwood? They'll remove us from service? No, we need proof. We need documentation that even they cannot dismiss or rationalize. That's how we ended up planning the expedition. Just Rafe and myself, heading back beyond Fern Canyon with every camera and recording device we could transport. We'd document whatever existed out there, obtain irrefutable evidence, and force the Park Service to acknowledge what was happening. It was insane. It was suicidal. It was the only option that preserved our sanity. We went in at dawn on a Thursday. The forest was shrouded in fog, dense enough that visibility dropped to perhaps 15 feet. Perfect conditions for something to hunt unobserved. We crossed Fern Canyon and immediately felt the transformation. The air became heavier, more difficult to breathe. The fog seemed to press against us with physical substance. Our compasses began spinning randomly, useless. GPS signals vanished. We were isolated completely. We followed the trail north for 90 minutes before Rafe stopped abruptly. "Do you hear that?" he whispered urgently. I listened carefully. Initially, nothing. Then I detected it. A rhythmic sound, like respiration, but too slow, too profound. Each breath lasting approximately 40 seconds. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. It was emanating from everywhere simultaneously, from the forest itself. Rafe extracted a digital recorder. "Whatever you are," he called out, "we know you're present. We're documenting your existence." The breathing ceased. In the silence that followed, I heard something that froze my blood solid. Rafe's voice, echoing back from the fog, "Documenting your existence," but with the words subtly rearranged. "Your existence documenting," then again from a different direction. "Existence documenting your." The words kept shifting, kept transforming, like something was learning language by deconstructing it and rebuilding it incorrectly. Rafe grabbed my arm violently, back to the canyon, immediately. But when we turned around, the trail had vanished, just forest in every direction, dense redwoods and fog and that terrible breathing resuming again. We attempted retracing our route, but every direction appeared identical. We were lost. Completely, utterly lost in a forest I'd worked for 8 years. That's when I saw them. Figures in the fog, dozens of them, standing between the trees. Initially, I thought they were people, hikers or other rangers. Then I realized they weren't moving, not breathing, just standing there, observing us. As my eyes adjusted, I saw what they actually were. Trees. The figures were trees, but they were fundamentally wrong. Their bark had shapes pressed into it from the interior, like faces and bodies attempting to push through. Some of the faces I recognized. Grant, the male backpacker we'd discovered. Others I didn't know. All of them screaming silently, trapped in the wood. Rafe saw them too. He made a sound like a wounded animal and stumbled backward. "That's where they go," he whispered. "That's what it does with them. It incorporates them into the trees, makes them part of the forest. They're all still alive in there, still conscious and aware." One of the trees moved, not swaying in wind, but deliberately moving, its trunk bending like an articulated joint. The face pressed against the bark. Grant's face opened its wooden mouth and screamed. The sound was like nothing terrestrial, like wind through a hollow cavern mixed with breaking branches and human agony. Other trees began moving too, bending toward us, reaching with branches that resembled arms far too much. We ran desperately. The forest closed in around us, trees grasping at our clothing, roots rising up to trip us. Rafe was ahead of me, crashing through undergrowth with frantic energy. I could hear water ahead. Fern Canyon, it had to be. We were almost free. Then Rafe vanished. One second he was there, the next he was gone completely. I skidded to a stop and looked around frantically. "Rafe!" I shouted. "Rafe, where are you?" I heard him respond, but his voice came from above. I looked up and saw him suspended in the air approximately 20 feet off the ground. No rope, no support structure, just hanging there as though gravity had ceased functioning on him. His arms and legs were spread wide, held by invisible forces. As I watched in horror, his body began to change. His skin took on a rough texture, darkening to the color of bark. His fingers stretched and branched like twigs. He was becoming a tree. Right before my eyes, Rafe Donovan was transforming into a redwood. His eyes found mine. He was still conscious, still aware of what was happening to him. His mouth moved, forming words with tremendous effort. Run, cross the canyon, don't look back. I ran. Behind me, I heard Rafe screaming as the transformation completed, his voice turning into that terrible wooden sound mixed with human despair. I crashed through the forest with no sense of direction, just moving, just attempting to escape. Branches whipped my face bloody. Roots grabbed my feet repeatedly. The breathing sounds surrounded me, growing louder, like the entire forest was inhaling. I burst out of the tree line and saw water. Fern Canyon, just 40 feet ahead. I sprinted for it, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. Something grabbed my backpack, yanking me backward violently. I shrugged out of the straps and kept running. 15 feet, 10 feet. I could see the far bank, could see normal forest where the trees grew naturally and the fog was simply fog. I jumped. For a moment, I was airborne over the stream, suspended between two realities. Then I hit the water and splashed across to the opposite side. The instant my feet touched the far bank, everything stopped. The breathing ceased. The pressure in the air lifted completely. I turned back and saw the forest across Fern Canyon, dark and wrong and hungry, but unable to cross the water. Standing at the edge of the stream, barely visible in the fog, was a figure. Tall, impossibly tall, perhaps 10 feet in height. Its body was constructed from twisted wood and shadow, bark and darkness woven together into something that approximated a human shape. It had no face, just a blank expanse where a face should be, smooth like polished wood. But I could feel it observing me, assessing me, making decisions. It raised one arm, pointing at me with a hand that had too many fingers, each one branching like a twig. Then it spoke, not with sound, but directly into my consciousness. Words formed there that I didn't want to comprehend but couldn't ignore. You have witnessed. You understand. Inform them. Warn them. This forest is not yours. Has never been yours. We permit you to walk the periphery, to pretend at understanding nature. But beyond the lines we have drawn, beyond the boundaries we have established, you are ours. You are sustenance. You are materials. You are nothing. The figure took a step backward and dissolved into the fog. But before it vanished completely, I saw other figures behind it, dozens, hundreds. An army of those tall, faceless entities standing in the forest, waiting, watching. I staggered back to the ranger station and filed my report. Missing ranger, lost to undetermined circumstances, unable to recover body. The lie felt like suffocation. Rafe had died, or worse than died, attempting to protect people from something they didn't know existed, and I was covering it up, maintaining the fiction that Redwood was safe and manageable and comprehensible. But I had no alternative, because I knew the truth now. I knew what Rafe had known, what Samuel Winters had known, what every ranger who'd worked these forests long enough eventually learned. There are boundaries in the wilderness that have nothing to do with our maps and trails. There are places where something else has claim, has power, has hunger. And when we cross those boundaries, when we ignore those claims, we pay the price in ways that make death look merciful. Over the following 3 weeks, I quietly implemented modifications. I had Fern Canyon Trail officially closed for ecological restoration, posted signs warning hikers to remain on marked paths exclusively, increased patrols on the southern trails to keep people away from the threshold. It wasn't sufficient. It would never be sufficient. But it was something. The other rangers noticed the changes, asked questions. I deflected, created excuses, hid behind bureaucratic justification. Only Timber Hayes knew the truth, and he'd requested a transfer to Joshua Tree. Can't be in the forest anymore, he told me. Can't sleep with all those trees surrounding me. I see faces in them now, constantly. I understood completely. Some nights I saw them too. Grant's face pressed against bark, still screaming. Rafe suspended in air, turning to wood. The male backpacker, with the empty chest cavity. They haunted my dreams and my waking hours equally. But the worst part was the knowledge. The certainty that this wasn't isolated to Redwood. Rafe's research had demonstrated the pattern. Every ancient forest had its thin places, its boundaries, its hungry entities. How many people had walked past Fern Canyon equivalents in other parks, other forests, other wildernesses? How many had crossed invisible thresholds and never returned? How many were suspended in the air right now, transforming slowly into trees while something primordial fed on their consciousness? I started maintaining my own journal, documenting everything Rafe had taught me and everything I'd learned since, just like Samuel Winters had in the 1940s, a record for whoever came after me, whoever would be the next ranger to discover the truth, because there would be a next one. There always was. The forest ensured it. 4 months after Rafe vanished, I was conducting a routine patrol when I discovered fresh claw marks on a redwood just south of Fern Canyon. 5 parallel gouges, each 4 inches deep, but these were on our side of the boundary. The entity, whatever it was, had crossed over. The rules were changing fundamentally. I reported it immediately, requesting immediate closure of the entire northern section of Redwood. The regional director denied it. Budget concerns, she said. Tourist season concerns. Public relations concerns. Everything except the only concern that mattered, that something in those woods was hunting, and now it was hunting on our side of the threshold. That night, I received a call. Hiker reporting disturbing sounds near the Gold Bluffs camping area, south of Fern Canyon by at least 4 miles. Sounds like someone in extreme distress, the dispatcher said, multiple campers reporting it. I drove out with another ranger named James Porter, a rookie who'd been with us for 8 months. We reached the camping area around 11 p.m. The place was in complete chaos. Families were packing up in darkness, loading vehicles in panic, clearly terrified. Several people were crying. A few were on phones, though service was unreliable at best. A woman in her 40s approached us. "Ranger, thank God. There's something out there in the trees." It was calling to my husband, using his mother's voice, his mother who died 3 years ago. Other campers echoed similar accounts. Voices of deceased relatives, children's laughter emanating from empty tents. That breathing sound, slow and profound, coming from the darkness beyond the campfire light. I felt my stomach drop. It was here. It had crossed every boundary we'd assumed was protective. James looked at me. Should we investigate the source? I thought about Grant, about Rafe, about all the names in Winter's journal, in Rafe's files, in my own expanding list. Then I thought about the families here, the children, the innocent people who just wanted to experience nature and had no concept of what they'd stumbled into. "No," I said firmly. "We evacuate everyone, immediately. Complete evacuation of this entire area." "On what authority?" James asked. I looked him directly in the eyes. "On the authority that if we don't, people are going to die. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And I refuse to have that on my conscience." We spent the next 5 hours evacuating the camping area. Some people were grateful. Others were furious, demanding explanations I couldn't provide. By dawn, the area was empty. James and I stood in the deserted campground, surrounded by abandoned fire rings and tent sites, and I knew this was just the beginning. The entity beyond Fern Canyon was expanding its territory, pushing outward. Soon there would be no safe zones in Redwood. Soon the entire forest would be compromised. I'm writing this now from my quarters at the ranger station. It's 4 in the morning and sleep is impossible. Outside my window, I can see the tree line. In the darkness between the redwoods, I see movement. Tall figures, impossibly tall, standing motionless, observing, waiting. Tomorrow I'm going to file my resignation. I'm going to take everything Rafe gave me, everything I've learned, and I'm going to attempt to warn people. Not officially, they'd never permit it, but somehow. Anonymous posts, leaked reports, something. Because the truth is, Redwood isn't safe anymore. Perhaps it never was. We just didn't know it. They told me the search grid ended at Fern Canyon. What they didn't tell me was that Fern Canyon was never meant to keep us out. It was meant to keep something else contained, and we broke that containment. We pushed too far, built too many trails, brought too many people into places that were never meant for human presence. Now the containment is failing completely. The boundary is collapsing, and what's on the other side is coming through. I can hear it now, that slow breathing, growing closer every night. I can see Rafe in the trees sometimes, his face pressing against the bark, attempting to warn me, attempting to communicate something, but I cannot understand the words. The language of trees is not meant for human comprehension. This is my warning, my testimony. If you're reading this, if you're planning to visit Redwood or any old-growth forest, please understand something fundamental. There are places in the wilderness that don't belong to us, never have. There are boundaries that should not be crossed. And if you hear voices in the darkness, voices of people you know, voices calling you deeper into the woods, do not listen. Do not go. Because once you cross that threshold, once you step beyond whatever invisible boundary separates their reality from ours, you're not returning. Not as yourself. Not as anything human. The search grid ended at Fern Canyon. I know now that it should have ended long before that. Should have ended at the edge of the parking area. Should have ended at the welcome sign, because the deeper truth is this: we're all beyond the threshold already. We've all crossed into their territory. We just don't comprehend it yet. And they're patient, impossibly patient. They've existed here for thousands of years. They can wait a little longer, wait for us to push deeper, wait for us to forget the warnings, wait for the moment when they can finally cross over completely and reclaim what was always theirs. I am Mason Keller. I was a ranger at Redwood National Forest, and I'm telling you to stay away. Stay away from Fern Canyon. Stay away from the old growth sections. Stay away from any place in the forest where the silence becomes absolute and the fog grows dense and the trees look like they're observing you. Because they are observing. They're always observing. And they're so very, very hungry. The breathing is directly outside my door now. I can see shadows moving past the windows. Multiple shadows, tall and wrong and patient. My time is nearly expired, but I've said what needed to be said. I've passed the warning forward. Don't cross the canyon. Don't go beyond the threshold. And if you do, God help you, because no one else can. The smoke signals are visible from my window now. 3 columns rising into the pre-dawn darkness. There hasn't been a native settlement here in over a century. Someone forgot to tell whatever's making those fires. This is Mason Keller, signing off, for the final time. My supervisor asked me to explain the 23 identical witness statements from different years, different visitors, all describing the same man standing at mile marker 19. I couldn't, especially since I've seen him too. My name is Carter Blake, and I've been a ranger at Sequoia National Forest for 8 years. 8 years of massive trees that make you feel small, of helping tourists photograph the General Sherman tree, of rescuing unprepared hikers from the backcountry trails. 8 years of listening to the old-timers talk about sections of the forest where even the wildlife won't go, of filing missing persons reports that never get resolved, of finding strange symbols carved into bark in places no human should be able to reach. I thought I understood this forest. I thought I knew every trail, every landmark, every hidden grove. I was wrong about all of it. 3 months ago, Logan Hayes transferred to my station. Logan had been with the Forest Service for 19 years, with postings from the Redwoods to the Smokies. He was supposed to help me manage the increased tourist traffic during peak season, but from the moment he arrived at the Grant Grove station, I knew something was off. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in months. His eyes had this hollow quality, like he was seeing things the rest of us couldn't. He refused to patrol the northern sections alone, and he kept a map on his desk with entire areas crossed out in red marker. On his 3rd day, Logan pulled me aside after our morning briefing. We were in the equipment shed, supposedly checking inventory, but I could tell that wasn't why he'd brought me there. His voice was low and urgent. "Blake, I need you to listen to me very carefully. There are 23 witness statements in the archives, all from different years, different people who don't know each other, all describing the same man at mile marker 19 on the Mineral King Road. Same description, same clothing, same everything. You read those statements yet?" I hadn't. I told him I'd look at them when I had time. "No," Logan said, gripping my arm. "You need to read them today. You need to understand what we're dealing with here. Because that man at mile marker 19, he's not alone. There are others, and they're not what they appear to be." I thought Logan was losing it. The job does that to people sometimes. Too much isolation, too much responsibility, too many nights spent thinking about the hikers who never made it back. But I promised I'd read the statements to humor him, and that night, after my shift ended, I pulled the files from the archive room. The first statement was from 1987. A family driving up to Mineral King reported seeing a man standing on the shoulder at mile marker 19. He was wearing a brown jacket and jeans, just standing there facing the forest. The father honked, thinking maybe the man needed help, but he didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge them at all. The second statement was from 1991. Different witness, same description. Brown jacket, jeans, standing at mile marker 19, facing the forest. This time a woman stopped her car and called out to him. No response. She said something about his stillness bothered her, like he wasn't breathing. I went through all 23 statements, different years spanning from 1987 to just last month. Different witnesses from different states, different backgrounds. But every single one described the same man in the same position at the same location. Some said they felt compelled to stop. Others said they felt an overwhelming urge to drive away as fast as possible. One statement from 2003 included a photograph. The image was blurry, taken from a moving vehicle, but you could make out the figure. Brown jacket, jeans, standing with his back to the road, facing the wall of sequoias. The photographer had written a note at the bottom of his statement. I went back the next day to see if he was still there. He was, same exact position. I'm certain it was the same man, but I'm also certain he hadn't moved even an inch in 24 hours. I called Logan that night. It was past midnight, but I knew he wouldn't be sleeping. He answered on the first ring. You read them? It wasn't a question. Yeah, I read them. What the hell is this, Logan? Some kind of prank? Urban legend? I wish it was. Logan's voice was tired. I've seen him too, Blake. I saw him 2 weeks ago when I was driving up to inspect the trail conditions near Mineral King. Same spot, same description. I stopped my vehicle. I got out. I walked right up to him. And what happened? He finally turned around. Logan went quiet for a moment. When he looked at me, Blake, there was nothing there. No face, just smooth skin where features should be. But I could feel him looking at me, studying me. And then he pointed toward the forest, deeper into the trees where there's no trail. He wanted me to follow him. I could feel the pull of it, like an invisible rope around my chest, dragging me toward the tree line. Did you follow? Almost. I got about 10 steps before I realized what I was doing, snapped myself out of it, and ran back to my vehicle. When I looked in the rearview mirror as I drove away, he was still standing there. But Blake, here's the thing. I could see other figures in the trees behind him, dozens of them, all standing the same way, all facing the road, all waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about those statements, about the man at mile marker 19, about what Logan had said. The next morning, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I drove up to Mineral King Road by myself. I needed to see. Mile marker 19 sits at a sharp curve where the road climbs into the higher elevations. On one side is a steep drop-off with views of the canyon below. On the other side is dense forest, old-growth sequoias that have been standing for thousands of years. The trees there grow so close together that even in full daylight, the spaces between them are dark. I pulled over at exactly mile marker 19 and turned off my engine. For several minutes, I just sat there, watching the tree line. Nothing moved. No wind, no birds, no sound at all. The silence was absolute and wrong. Forests are never that quiet. Then I saw him. He wasn't there, and then he was, like he'd materialized out of the shadows between the trees. Brown jacket, jeans, standing with his back to me, facing deeper into the forest. Exactly as described in 23 witness statements spanning decades. I got out of my vehicle. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to drive away and pretend I'd never come here. But I was a ranger. It was my job to investigate, to help people, to understand what was happening in my forest. I walked toward him. As I got closer, I noticed details that made my skin crawl. His clothes weren't actually clothes. What looked like fabric from a distance was something else up close. Something that resembled cloth but had the texture of bark, of moss, of things that grow rather than things that are manufactured. His hair wasn't hair. It was pine needles, perfectly arranged to mimic human hair, still green and alive. I stopped about 20 feet away. "Sir?" I called out. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need assistance?" He didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there with that impossible stillness that no living human could maintain. I took another step forward. "Sir, I'm Ranger Blake with the Forest Service. I need you to respond." That's when he turned around, Logan had tried to describe it, but words weren't adequate. Where his face should have been was smooth bark, seamless and featureless. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a blank expanse of wood-textured skin. But I could feel him looking at me, could feel the weight of his attention pressing against my mind. Then he raised his arm and pointed. Not at me, but past me, deeper into the forest. And I felt it, that pull Logan had described, like invisible hands reaching into my chest and pulling me forward. My feet started moving without my conscious decision. One step, then another. I was walking toward the tree line, toward the darkness between those massive sequoias, and I couldn't stop myself. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice was screaming, "This is wrong. This is how people disappear. This is how the missing persons cases start." But my body wouldn't listen. I kept walking, getting closer to the trees, closer to the shadows, closer to whatever was waiting in there. I was maybe 10 feet from the tree line when something broke through my paralysis. My radio crackled to static, and the sound was so unexpected, so jarringly normal, that it shocked me out of whatever trance I was in. I stopped walking. My hand went to my radio, and I forced myself to turn around. The faceless man was still there, still pointing, but now I could see what Logan had seen. There were others behind him. Dozens of figures standing between the trees, all with that same terrible stillness, all watching, all waiting. I ran back to my vehicle, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. The moment I was inside, I locked the doors and started the engine. As I pulled away, I looked in my rearview mirror. All the figures were gone. The forest looked normal again. But at mile marker 19, the faceless man remained, brown jacket and jeans and pine needle hair, turning slowly back toward the trees. I drove straight to Logan's quarters and told him everything. He listened without interruption, his expression growing darker. "Welcome to the truth, Blake. Welcome to what they don't put in the Ranger training manuals." Over the next week, Logan showed me what he'd been compiling. Files and photographs and maps going back decades. Sequoia National Forest had patterns, he explained. Clusters of disappearances in specific areas. Bodies found in impossible conditions. Hikers reporting encounters with people who weren't quite right. And always, always, that boundary. An invisible line past which the forest stopped following normal rules. "Look at this," Logan said, spreading a topographical map across his desk. He'd marked it with different colored pins. Red pins for disappearances, blue pins for unusual sightings, green pins for recovered bodies. The pins formed a clear pattern, clustering around certain areas of the forest. See how they concentrate? These aren't random. These are territories. Territories? What do you mean, territories? I mean something claims those sections of forest. Something that's been here longer than we have, longer than the Park Service, longer than any human settlement. The Yokuts people who lived here before us, they had stories. They talked about guardians of the forest, about spirits that wore human shapes but weren't human. They knew to avoid certain areas, certain groves of trees. We just came in and drew our maps right over their sacred boundaries and pretended it didn't matter. Logan pulled out another file. This one contained photographs that made my stomach turn. Bodies found in the backcountry. Hikers who'd been missing for days or weeks. But the condition of the bodies was wrong. Some were positioned sitting upright against trees, their eyes open, their expressions peaceful. Others had been arranged in geometric patterns, their limbs positioned at unnatural angles. One photograph showed a woman who'd been missing for 2 months. She was found standing in a shallow creek, water flowing around her legs, her hands raised like she was reaching for something. She'd been dead the entire time, but somehow her body hadn't decayed, hadn't been touched by animals, just stood there in the water, perfectly preserved, until a trail crew found her. "What does this?" I asked. "What's capable of doing this?" "I don't know what it is," Logan said, "but I know what it does. It takes people, changes them, uses them." The faceless man at mile marker 19, I don't think he was always like that. I think he was human once. I think he crossed some line, went somewhere he shouldn't have gone, and whatever's out there transformed him, made him into a lure, a beacon to draw others in. That night, we had our first disappearance of the season. An experienced hiker named David Chen went missing on the Alta Peak Trail. He checked in at the trailhead at dawn, solo hiking with a plan to summit and return by evening. When he didn't come back by midnight, his wife called it in. Logan and I led the search party at first light. The Alta Peak Trail was one of the areas Logan had marked on his map. one of the clusters where disappearances concentrated. As we climbed higher into the forest, I felt that wrongness again. The silence was too complete. The shadows between the trees were too dark. We found David's backpack at approximately 10,000 feet elevation, right where the trail crosses a small stream. The pack was sitting upright on a boulder, perfectly positioned, all the zippers closed. Inside, everything was still there: food, water, first aid kit, his phone. But no David. The other rangers wanted to expand the search grid, but Logan stopped them. "Nobody goes off the main trail," he said firmly. "We search the trail corridor only. Nobody goes into the trees." One of the younger rangers, a woman named Patricia Vasquez, objected. "But if he's injured and wandered off trail, we need to search the surrounding area. That's basic search and rescue protocol." "Not here," Logan said. His voice had an edge that made everyone stop and listen. "Not in this section. We search the trail only. That's an order." Patricia looked at me for support, but I backed Logan up. I'd seen enough to trust his instincts. We continued the search, following the trail up toward the peak. About half a mile past where we'd found the backpack, one of the rangers called out, "Over here, you need to see this." We gathered around a massive sequoia that had to be at least 20 feet in diameter. The bark on one side had been carved with symbols, not the typical initials or hearts you sometimes find. These were complex geometric patterns, spirals and lines that seemed to shift when you looked at them directly. And at the center of the carved area was a handprint, human-sized, pressed into the wood like the bark had been soft clay. Logan examined it closely without touching it. "This is fresh, maybe a few hours old." He looked up at the tree canopy, then back at the trail. Chen saw something, came to this tree, pressed his hand against it. Then he went into the forest. "How do you know?" "Because that's what they do. They mark themselves. Or it marks them. Either way, once you touch one of these carved trees, you're connected to it. And then you can't help but follow." We never found David Chen. Not his body, not any trace of him beyond that backpack and that handprint on the tree. We searched for 3 days, brought in additional teams, used helicopters and search dogs. Nothing. He'd vanished into the forest as completely as if he'd never existed. 2 weeks later, a family hiking the Congress Trail reported seeing a man standing among the trees near the General Sherman tree. They said he was just standing there, perfectly still, wearing hiking clothes that looked weathered and old. When they tried to photograph him, their cameras malfunctioned. When they approached to ask if he needed help, he turned and walked deeper into the grove. They followed for a few steps, then got an overwhelming feeling that they shouldn't, that following him would be a terrible mistake. They gave me a description: Asian male, approximately 40 years old, wearing a blue jacket and hiking boots. David Chen's wife confirmed it matched her husband's appearance and clothing. Logan and I went to the General Sherman tree that evening, after the tourist crowds had cleared. The grove was empty, the massive sequoias casting long shadows in the fading light. We walked slowly through the area where the family had reported their sighting, and I felt it immediately. That pull, that sense of something watching. Then I saw him, David Chen, standing between 2 ancient trees about 50 yards off the main path. He was facing away from us, his posture rigid. As we watched, he raised his arm and pointed deeper into the forest. The same gesture the faceless man had made at mile marker 19. "David," Logan called out. "David Chen, can you hear me?" Chen's head turned. The movement was wrong, too smooth, too mechanical. When he faced us, I saw that his features were starting to fade. His face was becoming indistinct, blurring at the edges like a photograph losing focus. His eyes were changing, becoming dark and empty, but his mouth moved, forming words in a voice that sounded hollow and distant. The forest called me. Now I call for it. Come deeper. Come see what I've seen." The pull was immediate and intense. My feet started moving toward him without my permission. Logan grabbed my arm, his grip painful. "Don't listen. Don't look at him. Back away, now." We retreated, forcing ourselves to turn away from Chen's beckoning figure. Behind us, I heard his voice again, multiplied and echoing. "Come deeper. Come see. The forest is waiting." We made it back to the main path, both of us breathing hard. When I looked back, Chen was gone, but I could see others now, dozens of figures standing in the shadows between the trees, all of them facing us, all of them pointing deeper into the forest. That's when Logan told me the rest. the part he'd been holding back. This forest is full of them, Blake. People who crossed the line, people who went too deep, who touched the wrong trees, who followed the wrong paths. They're still here, but they're not people anymore. They're part of whatever this thing is. They're its voice, its hands, its lures. Over the next month, I learned to see the signs. Carved trees with handprints, sections of forest where the silence was absolute, areas where hikers reported feeling watched or called. We quietly closed trails, rerouted paths, created barriers using whatever excuses we could manufacture. Erosion control, wildlife habitat protection, trail maintenance, anything to keep people away from the zones where the boundaries were thinnest. But we couldn't close everything. Sequoia National Forest covers 1.1 million acres. We had maybe 40 rangers total. We couldn't watch it all, couldn't protect everyone. The disappearances continued, not frequently enough to cause major alarm, just the normal statistical background noise that every national forest experiences. A solo hiker here, a wandering tourist there, people who went off trail and never came back. We wrote the reports, conducted the searches, comforted the families, and we lied. We lied every single day because the truth would sound insane. Then Patricia Vasquez started asking questions. She'd noticed the pattern of closed trails, noticed how Logan and I always seemed to shut down searches in certain areas. She was smart and observant, and she wasn't satisfied with our official explanations. She cornered me one evening at the Grant Grove station. "Blake, what's really going on? What are you and Hayes not telling us? I've been doing this job for 5 years. I know when I'm being stonewalled. Those closed trails, those restricted zones, the way you two react whenever someone suggests expanding search grids into certain areas. What aren't you saying?" I looked at Logan. He gave me a slight nod. "She needs to know. She's going to figure it out anyway, and better she hears it from us than discovers it on her own." So we told her, showed her the files, the maps, the witness statements, showed her the photographs of bodies found in impossible conditions, told her about the faceless man at mile marker 19, about David Chen standing in the grove, about the handprints on the carved trees. We told her everything. Patricia listened without interrupting. When we finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I need to see. I need to see for myself, or I'll never really believe this." Against my better judgment, we took her to mile marker 19 2 days later. The three of us drove up Mineral King Road in the early morning. The faceless man appeared exactly where he always did, materializing from the shadows between the trees. Patricia saw him. I watched the color drain from her face as he turned toward us, as that blank expanse of wood-textured skin faced our direction. He pointed into the forest, and Patricia, despite all our warnings, despite everything we'd told her, took a step toward him. Logan and I grabbed her, physically restraining her. Patricia was fighting us, not angrily but desperately, like someone trying to reach water in the desert. "I have to go. Let me go. He's showing me something I need to see." We dragged her back to the vehicle and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw the faceless man still pointing, and behind him, more figures were emerging from the forest. So many more than I'd ever seen before. Patricia was sick for 3 days. Fever, chills, nightmares. She kept talking in her sleep about walking through endless forest, about trees with faces, about something vast and ancient that was waiting beneath the soil. When she finally recovered, she was different, quieter, haunted. "I can still feel it," she told me. "That pull. Every time I look at the forest now, I feel it calling me, wanting me to come back, wanting me to walk into the trees and keep walking until I become one of them." That was 2 months ago. Patricia requested a transfer to a different forest, somewhere far from Sequoia. Her replacement arrived last week, young and enthusiastic and completely unaware of what walks between these ancient trees. I'll have to tell him eventually. Have to show him the maps and files and witness statements. Have to make him understand that the forest he thinks he knows is hiding something much older and stranger than anything in the ranger training manuals. But first, I have to deal with the latest development, because things are changing, the boundaries are shifting, areas that used to be safe aren't anymore. Yesterday, a tourist reported seeing the faceless man at the General Sherman tree, not near it, but standing right at the base of the world's largest tree, in the middle of the paved path where thousands of visitors walk every day. Standing there during visiting hours, multiple witnesses saw him, multiple photographs were taken. I've seen the photographs. They show the sequoia clearly. They show the other tourists in the background. But where the faceless man should be, there's just a blur. An indistinct shadow that your eyes slide off when you try to focus on it. But all the witnesses insist they saw him clearly in person. Saw that blank wooden face. Saw him pointing into the forest. Several said they felt compelled to follow. One woman actually left the path and walked 50 feet into the grove before her husband stopped her. Logan and I are reviewing the maps again tonight, trying to figure out what the pattern means, what the changes signify. But I think we both know the truth. We've just been avoiding saying it out loud. The boundaries are collapsing. Whatever has been contained in the deep forest, in the zones marked by carved trees and silence and that terrible pull, it's expanding. Moving into areas where people congregate, getting bolder, growing stronger. And the worst part? I don't think we're dealing with something that's just here in Sequoia. Logan has contacts in other forests, other parks. They're reporting similar phenomena, figures that appear and disappear, hikers who vanish without trace, bodies found in impossible conditions, that same pull, that same calling into the deep forest. It's everywhere, in every old-growth forest, every wilderness area that's been standing longer than human memory. Whatever this is, it's not isolated, it's connected, and it's waking up. I'm writing this down because someone needs to know. Someone needs to have the documentation when the inevitable happens. When more rangers start seeing what Logan and Patricia and I have seen. When the boundaries fail completely, and those figures walk out of the shadows and onto the main paths where everyone can see them. The 23 witness statements about mile marker 19 are just the beginning. There will be more, many more, and eventually someone with authority is going to have to acknowledge what we've been denying, that these forests aren't empty wilderness, that something ancient and patient has been here long before us, that the trees aren't just trees. My supervisor asked me to explain the 23 identical witness statements. I can't. Not in any way that makes rational sense, but I can tell you this much. Whatever stands at mile marker 19, whatever pointed David Chen deeper into the grove, whatever carved those symbols into living wood and preserved dead bodies in mountain streams, it's been here for thousands of years. It's part of this forest. Maybe it is the forest, in some way we don't understand. And it's not leaving. We are guests here, temporary visitors in something else's domain. We built trails and visitor centers and pretended this place belonged to us. But the forest remembers what we've forgotten. It remembers the original agreements, the ancient boundaries, and it's reminding us, one disappearance at a time, that some places were never meant for human feet. Tonight, I'll drive up to mile marker 19 again. I don't know why. Maybe to see if he's still there. Maybe to finally ask the question I've been afraid to ask. What do you want? What are you trying to tell us? Or maybe I just need to look into that blank wooden face one more time and remind myself that this is real, that I'm not imagining it. That the forest I've dedicated my career to understanding contains mysteries I'll never solve and dangers I can barely acknowledge. Logan says I shouldn't go alone, says it's too risky. But I think I need to. I think someone needs to try communicating with whatever stands at that marker. Someone needs to try understanding, even if understanding brings its own kind of danger. If I don't come back, these files are in my desk drawer. Everything Logan showed me, everything I've compiled, the maps with the colored pins, the witness statements going back decades, the photographs of bodies and carved trees and handprints pressed into ancient bark, all the evidence we've gathered of something impossible living in these mountains. Use it wisely, use it to protect people. And whatever you do, if you come to Sequoia National Forest, stay on the marked trails. Don't touch the carved trees. Don't follow the figures that point into the shadows. Don't listen to voices calling from the deep forest, even if they sound like people you know. Because once you follow, once you cross that invisible boundary, you're not coming back, not as yourself. You'll join the others standing between the trees. You'll become another figure pointing inward, another voice calling travelers to come deeper, come see, come join the ancient thing that sleeps beneath these roots. The forest is beautiful. The sequoias are magnificent. But beauty and magnificence can hide terrible secrets. And in Sequoia, those secrets are starting to walk in daylight. This is Ranger Carter Blake, signing off. If you're reading this, I probably didn't make it back from mile marker 19. But that's all right. Someone had to try. Someone had to look that blank wooden face in the eye and ask the question. Just promise me something. Promise you'll keep watching, keep documenting, keep trying to understand. Because that's all we can do. Watch and document and try to protect people from something we barely comprehend. The faceless man is still waiting at mile marker 19. He's always waiting, and somewhere in the deep forest, David Chen and all the others stand motionless between the ancient trees, pointing the way deeper, always deeper, into the heart of something that was here before the first sequoia sprouted, before the first human walked these mountains, before time itself began counting days. The forest is waiting, it's patient, it has all the time in the world. I found the missing hiker's camera on the north ridge of Mount Rainier. Footage intact. Park Services confiscated it within an hour. I saw what was on that camera before they took it, and I understand why some trails stay closed for maintenance indefinitely. My name is Grim Sentinel, and I served as a senior ranger in Washington's Olympic National Forest for 23 years. The Hoh Rainforest was my jurisdiction, 120,000 acres of temperate rainforest where Sitka spruce and western hemlock grow 300 feet tall, where moss hangs like burial shrouds from every branch, and where fog rolls in so thick you cannot see your hand in front of your face. It is one of the wettest places in North America, receiving nearly 12 feet of rain annually, and it is one of the oldest forests on the continent. Some of those trees have been growing since before Columbus set sail. The forest has stood for thousands of years, watching, waiting, keeping secrets that would drive most men mad. I learned those secrets the hard way. I paid for that knowledge with the lives of my colleagues and a piece of my sanity I will never recover. What I am about to tell you is the truth, documented and verified, though the official reports will tell you something different. The official reports will tell you equipment failure, bear attacks, tragic accidents in difficult terrain. The official reports are lies designed to keep people calm and keep them hiking those trails and spending money in our towns. The truth is something else entirely. The truth is that we share these mountains with something ancient and territorial, something that tolerates our presence only so long as we stay within certain boundaries. Cross those boundaries, and you will discover what real terror feels like. This is what happened when we crossed those boundaries. This is what happened when 3 rangers entered the Deep Hoh, beyond the tourist trails and marked paths, into territory that had been forbidden for longer than anyone could remember. This is the testimony of the only one who made it out alive. The rain was falling in sheets the morning we departed, a cold November rain that soaked through every layer of clothing and chilled you to the bone. The kind of rain that makes you question why anyone would choose to live in the Pacific Northwest. I stood at the ranger station with my 2 colleagues, Night Warden and Shadow Keeper, reviewing our equipment one final time. 3 packs loaded with gear, supplies for 5 days, emergency beacons, satellite phones, weapons. We were as prepared as anyone could be for a trek into the deepest section of the Hoh, a region the old-timers called the Cathedral because of how the massive trees formed natural archways overhead, creating spaces that felt sacred and profane at the same time. Night Warden was younger than me by 15 years, built like a lumberjack, with a thick red beard and hands that could crush rocks. He had been ranging for 8 years, all of it in Olympic, and he knew the forest as well as anyone. He was checking his rifle, a Remington 700 chambered in .30-06, capable of dropping an elk at 300 yards. Standard issue for rangers working in bear country, though we all knew there were things in these woods that a rifle would not stop. He caught me watching and grinned. "Ready for a walk in the park, Grim?" "Nothing about the cathedral is a park," I replied, adjusting the straps on my pack. 60 pounds of gear, feeling heavier with each passing year. I was getting too old for this, my knees reminding me with every step, but someone had to go in. Someone had to find out what happened to the missing research team. Shadowkeeper was checking the GPS units, making sure we had redundant navigation systems. She was the youngest of us, only 32, but she had a mind like a steel trap and nerves that never seemed to fray. She had grown up in the Quinault Nation, learned to track and hunt before she could read, and she understood these forests in ways that those of us who came from cities never could. She looked up from the GPS, her dark eyes serious. "The elders say no one should go into the cathedral during the dark months. They say it belongs to the old ones when the sun is weak." "The elders say a lot of things," Night Warden replied, but there was no mockery in his voice. Everyone who worked these forests long enough learned to respect the indigenous warnings. Too many of them had proven true. "What exactly did they say?" I asked Shadowkeeper. She had connections to her tribe that the rest of us lacked, access to knowledge that had been passed down for generations. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "They say the cathedral is a borderland, A place where the old ones made their last stand when our people first came to these mountains. There was a war, a long time ago, and a treaty was made. The old ones would stay in the deep forest, and we would stay in the river valleys and the coast. Anyone who breaks the treaty does not come back. Or if they do come back, they come back wrong. Wrong how? Night Warden asked. Changed. Not quite human anymore. Speaking in languages no one understands, or not speaking at all. Just staring with empty eyes until they walk back into the forest and disappear. She looked at both of us. The research team went into the cathedral 6 days ago. Radio contact was lost 4 days ago. If the stories are true, we should not go looking for them. We should assume they are gone and warn everyone else to stay away. We cannot do that, I said, though part of me agreed with her. They have families. They deserve to know what happened, and if there is a chance they are still alive, we have to try. Shadowkeeper nodded slowly, accepting this even though I could see the fear in her eyes. She understood duty as well as any of us. Then we go carefully. We watch for the signs, the marked trees, the rock cairns, the silence. If we see those things, we turn back immediately. No arguments, no debate. We leave. Agreed, I said, and Night Warden nodded his consent. We loaded into the truck and drove to the trailhead, the windshield wipers struggling against the downpour. The Ho River Trail started in relative civilization, a visitor center and parking lot that saw thousands of tourists every year. They would hike the first few miles, marvel at the enormous trees and the thick carpet of moss, take their photos, and turn back. Few ventured beyond the marked trails. Fewer still went into the cathedral, where the trails ended and you navigated by compass and instinct. We were going 15 miles beyond the last trail marker, into old-growth forest that had never been logged, never been mapped with any accuracy, never been tamed. The rain continued as we began hiking, the trail quickly turning to mud beneath our boots. The forest canopy was so thick that even in daylight it felt like dusk, the massive trees blocking out the sky. Sitka spruce rose like the pillars of some impossible cathedral, their trunks 10 feet across, their bark thick with moss and lichen. Between them grew western hemlock and Douglas fir, creating layers of green that seemed to go on forever. The undergrowth was dense, ferns as tall as a man, devil's club with thorns that could pierce through gloves, salmonberry and thimbleberry forming impenetrable thickets. Everything was wet. The trees wept moisture, condensation dripping from every branch and leaf. The moss held water like a sponge, squelching under our boots. The air itself felt liquid, so saturated with humidity that breathing felt like drowning. This was the rainforest in its element, ancient and overwhelming, a place that reminded you how small and temporary human beings really are. We hiked in silence for the first hour, saving our breath, finding our rhythm. The trail was well maintained this close to civilization, wide enough for 2 people, marked with signs pointing back towards safety. But I knew those signs would end soon, and we would be on our own in terrain that could kill you in 1,000 different ways. Hypothermia, broken bones from hidden deadfall, bear attacks, getting lost in the maze of identical-looking forest, and if Shadowkeeper's warnings were true, something worse than all of those combined. Around midday we stopped for lunch at a place called Elk Grove, a clearing where Roosevelt elk sometimes gathered to graze. Today it was empty, just mud and trampled vegetation and the endless rain. We ate energy bars and drank from our water bottles, not bothering with a fire in this weather. Night Warden pulled out the map, a topographical chart marked with the last known position of the research team. They were studying moss, he said, tracing the route with one thick finger. Some kind of rare species that only grows in old-growth forests. Their base camp was supposed to be here, about 12 miles in, near Godkin Creek. Last radio contact placed them heading further east, into the cathedral proper. After that, nothing. What were their last words? Shadowkeeper asked. Night Warden consulted his notes. Researcher named Dr. Patricia Holbrook was on the radio. She said they had found something unusual. Structures made from tree branches arranged in patterns. She wanted to document them before heading back. That was the last transmission. Structures, I repeated. What kind of structures? She did not specify, just said they were definitely not natural, definitely not made by any animal she recognized. Shadowkeeper and I exchanged glances. We both knew what that meant. The old ones left markers, territorial boundaries made from broken branches and stacked rocks. Anyone who had worked these forests long enough had seen them, though most people convinced themselves they were natural formations or the work of previous hikers. But those of us who knew better, who had heard the stories and seen things we could not explain, we understood. Those markers were warnings. Cross this line at your own risk. Did she say anything else? I asked. just that they were going to investigate further. Then the transmission cut off. Equipment failure? Shadowkeeper suggested, though her tone indicated she did not believe it. All their equipment at once? Radio, satellite phone, emergency beacon? Not likely. We finished lunch in grim silence and continued hiking. The trail became rougher, more overgrown, until finally it disappeared entirely around mile 8. From here on, we would be navigating by compass and GPS, following the coordinates the research team had transmitted before they went silent. The forest grew denser, the trees larger, the undergrowth more aggressive. We had to use machetes to clear a path in some places, hacking through walls of ferns and devil's club, our hands getting torn up despite the gloves. The rain never stopped. If anything, it grew heavier, a constant drumming on the canopy above that filtered down to us as a steady drizzle. Water ran down the backs of our necks, soaked through our boots, made everything slippery and treacherous. The temperature was dropping too, hovering just above freezing, hypothermia weather. We needed to make camp soon, get dry, start a fire if possible. We pushed on until 4 in the afternoon, when the light began to fail. Nightfall came early in November, and in the rainforest it came even earlier, the already dim light fading to near darkness by 5 o'clock. We needed shelter before then. Shadowkeeper spotted a massive fallen cedar, a tree that must have been 1,000 years old before it toppled, creating a natural lean-to against a rocky outcrop. We set up our tents beneath it, using the log and rocks as windbreaks. It was not perfect, but it would keep most of the rain off us. Getting a fire started in these conditions was nearly impossible. Everything soaked through, but Night Warden managed it using some chemical fire starters he had brought. The flames sputtered and struggled, but eventually we had enough heat to warm our hands and dry some of our clothing. We cooked freeze-dried meals over the small fire, the food tasteless but necessary, calories to keep us going. As we ate, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The forest was silent. Not the peaceful silence of a quiet evening, but the oppressive silence of a prey animal hiding from a predator. No birds calling, no squirrels chittering, no insects buzzing. Nothing. Just the rain and the crackling fire and our own breathing. Shadowkeeper noticed it too. She stood up slowly, her hand moving to the knife at her belt. Something is wrong. Define wrong, Night Warden said, but he was already reaching for his rifle. Listen, what do you hear? We all fell silent, straining our ears. Nothing. Absolutely nothing except the ambient sounds of the rainforest. No animal noises at all. Could be a predator nearby, Night Warden suggested. Cougar maybe, or a bear. Bears are hibernating, Shadowkeeper replied. And a cougar would not silence the entire forest like this. This is something else. I felt it then, a sensation I had experienced only a few times in my career. The feeling of being watched. Not by an animal, which triggers a different kind of awareness, but by something intelligent. Something that understood we were here and was evaluating whether we posed a threat. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my hand moved instinctively to my sidearm, a Glock 20 loaded with hard-cast bullets designed to penetrate thick hide and bone. We should set watches, I said quietly. Rotating shifts, 2 hours each, and keep the fire burning all night. Neither of them argued. We drew straws, and I got the first watch. Night Warden and Shadowkeeper retreated to their tents, though I doubted either of them would sleep. I sat by the fire, my rifle across my lap, staring into the darkness beyond our small circle of light. The rain continued, the silence continued, and slowly, gradually, I became aware of movement in the forest around us. Nothing I could see directly, just the sense of shapes shifting in the darkness, staying just beyond the firelight. I turned on my flashlight, swept the beam through the trees. Nothing, just trunks and undergrowth and the endless rain. But the moment I turned the light off, I felt that presence again, watching, waiting. An hour into my watch, I heard it, a sound that made every muscle in my body tense. A vocalization, deep and resonant, more felt than heard. It started low, almost subsonic, then rose in pitch and volume until it became a howl that echoed through the forest. Not a wolf howl, not an elk bugle, not a cougar scream. Something else, something that sounded almost human, but wrong. Too deep, too powerful, coming from lungs the size of barrels. The sound cut off abruptly, and the silence crashed back down. Then, from a different direction, another call answered. Then a third, from yet another direction. They were surrounding us, communicating, coordinating. Night Warden emerged from his tent, rifle in hand, his face pale. What the hell was that? I do not know, I lied, because I did know. I had heard those calls before, years ago, on a patrol in the North Cascades. The old ranger I had been with, a man named Bill Hutchins, who had since retired, had gone silent when he heard them. Later, over whiskey at a bar where no one would overhear, he told me the truth. The old ones, the forest giants, Sasquatch. They were real, and they were territorial, and they did not like humans in their domain. Shadowkeeper had emerged too, her face set in grim determination. We need to leave, now, tonight. In the dark, in this rain. That is suicide, Night Warden protested. Staying here is suicide, she shot back. Those calls are hunting calls. They are telling each other where we are, boxing us in. Hunting calls? Night Warden looked at her like she had lost her mind. What hunts humans? The old ones, she said simply. The creatures my people made the treaty with. They are warning us to leave their territory. There is no such thing as... Night Warden began, but I cut him off. Yes, there is. I have seen them, years ago, from a distance. I thought I was hallucinating, or that it was a bear, or a trick of the light. But I saw them, and I think Shadowkeeper is right. We are in their territory, and they want us gone. Night Warden stared at me, trying to process this. He was a rational man, a scientist at heart despite being a ranger, and what we were suggesting violated everything he believed about the world. But he was also experienced enough to know when his colleagues were genuinely afraid, and right now both Shadowkeeper and I were terrified. What do they look like? He asked finally. Imagine a gorilla, I said, but taller, leaner, built for moving through dense forest, 8 to 10 feet tall, covered in dark hair, with a face that is almost human. They walk upright, use tools, live in family groups. They are intelligent, Night Warden. As intelligent as we are, maybe more so. And they have been hiding in these forests for thousands of years. Another call echoed through the forest, closer this time, then another, and another. They were definitely closing in, tightening the circle. Shadowkeeper was right. We needed to move. Pack everything, I ordered. We head back the way we came. Stay together, keep your lights on, and if you see anything move, you shout. No heroics, no investigations. We get out of the cathedral and back to marked trails. The research team is gone. If they went deeper into the territory, they are already dead. We are not going to join them. We broke camp in frantic haste, stuffing gear into packs, kicking dirt over the fire. The darkness pressed in around us, the rain masking any sounds of approach. I kept my flashlight moving, sweeping the trees, expecting at any moment to see those eyes, amber yellow and intelligent, staring back at me. We started hiking, moving as fast as we dared in the darkness. The GPS guided us, showing the road back towards civilization, back towards safety. But the calls continued, pacing us, always staying just ahead or behind or to the sides. They were hurting us, I realized, guiding us in a specific direction. But was it towards safety or into a trap? Grim, Shadowkeeper whispered, her voice tight with fear. Look at the trees. I turned my flashlight to where she was pointing. The trees were marked. Deep gouges raked into the bark, 4 parallel scratches cutting through the outer layers and into the white wood beneath. The marks were fresh, sap still weeping, and they covered every tree in sight. This was not subtle territorial marking. This was a warning. This was them saying, you have gone too far. You are in the forbidden zone. Turn back or die. Keep moving, I said, though my voice shook. Do not stop for anything. We pushed forward, our lights cutting through the darkness, our breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees growing larger and more twisted, the undergrowth becoming so thick we had to force our way through. And still those calls echoed through the night, growing more frequent, more aggressive. Then Night Warden stopped suddenly, his light fixed on something ahead. Oh God, he breathed. I moved up beside him and saw what had frozen him in place, a structure, made from tree branches, each one at least 6 inches thick, arranged in a teepee shape that stood 12 feet tall. But it was not the structure itself that was terrifying. It was what hung from it. Clothing, backpacks, equipment, all of it torn and stained with something dark that could only be blood. The research team's gear, and woven into the structure barely visible in the flashlight beam, were bones. Human bones. Picked clean and deliberately placed, forming patterns that suggested ritual or warning or both. We are standing in a burial ground, Shadowkeeper whispered, or a killing ground. The elders spoke of places like this, where the old ones bring their enemies, where they display what happens to those who violate the treaty. The research team, Night Warden said, his voice hollow. They found this. They must have tried to document it, and the creatures killed them for it. And now we have found it too, I said grimly. Which means they will do the same to us unless we run. Now. We ran. Abandoning any pretense of caution, we crashed through the forest, branches tearing at our faces, roots catching our feet. Behind us, the calls erupted into a cacophony of howls and screams, so loud they hurt our ears, so close we could feel the vibrations in our chests. They were coming. The old ones were coming, and they were not interested in warnings anymore. I saw one. Just a glimpse as my flashlight beam swept across a cluster of trees. A massive shape, at least 9 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair matted with rain. Arms that hung past its knees. A face that was flat and broad with deep-set eyes that caught the light and glowed. It stood perfectly still, watching us run, making no attempt to chase. Because it did not need to chase. It knew this forest, it knew where we would go. It knew we were already trapped. "There!" Night Warden shouted, pointing ahead. A ravine, cutting through the forest, too wide to jump, the sides too steep to climb down in the darkness. We skidded to a stop at the edge, our lights showing a drop of at least 40 feet to a creek bed below. "We have to go around," Shadowkeeper said, already moving along the edge, searching for a crossing point. But the calls were all around us now, from ahead, from behind, from both sides. And then they emerged from the trees. 6 of them, maybe more. Massive shapes materializing from the darkness, moving with a silence that should have been impossible for creatures so large. They formed a semicircle, blocking our escape routes, leaving only the ravine behind us. The largest one stepped forward. It was enormous, easily 10 feet tall, with shoulders as wide as a doorway. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see its face clearly, almost human, but not quite. The brow ridge was heavier, the jaw more pronounced, the nose flatter and broader, but the eyes, God, the eyes. They held intelligence, understanding, and something else, anger. We had violated their territory. We had found their sacred places, and now we would pay the price. I raised my rifle, knowing it was hopeless but unable to just stand there. "Federal Rangers!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Back away! We are leaving! We are leaving right now!" The creature tilted its head, studying me. Then it opened its mouth and made a sound that was unmistakably laughter. Deep, rumbling, mocking. It understood what I had said. It understood exactly what we were and what we thought we could do, and it found it amusing. The other creatures moved closer, tightening the circle. I fired. The rifle's report was deafening in the forest, the muzzle flash blinding. I aimed for center mass on the big one, just as I had been trained. The bullet hit with a meaty thump, and the creature staggered back a step. But it did not fall. It looked down at the wound, then back at me, and the expression on its face changed from amusement to rage. It roared, a sound so loud it felt like being hit with a physical force. The other creatures joined in, a chorus of fury that made the trees shake. "Run!" I screamed, and we bolted. Not forward into the creatures, but backward toward the ravine. It was suicide, but it was the only option left. We hit the edge going at full speed and went over, tumbling down the steep slope, sliding through mud and loose rocks, branches tearing at our clothing and skin. I hit the bottom hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. Above me, I could hear the creatures at the ravine's edge, howling in frustration. They could climb down easily, but it would take time we might be able to use. "Move!" I gasped, struggling to my feet. My left ankle screamed in pain, probably sprained, but I forced myself forward. Shadowkeeper was already up, blood running from a gash on her forehead. She grabbed my arm, supporting me. "Night Warden," she called. "Where are you?" A groan answered from nearby. We found him pinned under a fallen log, his leg bent at a sickening angle. Broken. Definitely broken. Shadowkeeper and I pulled the log off him, and he screamed, the sound echoing through the ravine. Above us, the creatures had begun descending. We could hear them moving down the slope, could see their shapes in the darkness. They were not hurrying. They knew we could not escape now, not with Night Warden injured. "Leave me," Night Warden gasped. "Take the evidence. Tell people what happened. Leave me." "Shut up," Shadowkeeper snarled, getting her shoulder under his arm. "We are all leaving together." But we were not. Deep down, all 3 of us knew it. Night Warden could barely stand, let alone hike. and the creatures were almost upon us. We had seconds to decide. I made the decision. Shadowkeeper, run. Follow the creek downstream. It will take you out of the cathedral, back toward the river trail. Do not stop. Do not look back. Get to the ranger station and call for extraction. Tell them what happened. What about you? I am staying with Night Warden. Someone has to slow them down, buy you time to escape. Grim. No. That is an order, Ranger. You are the only one who can warn people. The only one who knows the full truth. You have to survive. Now go. She hesitated for one more second, anguish clear on her face. Then she turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness of the ravine, her flashlight beam bouncing as she sprinted. Night Warden looked up at me, his face gray with pain. You should have gone with her. And let you die alone? Not happening. The creatures reached the bottom of the ravine, 6 of them, moving with coordinated precision, spreading out to surround us. The large one, the one I had shot, was in the center. It had a wound on its chest, blood matting the fur, but it did not seem to slow it down at all. It walked forward until it was standing directly in front of me, so close I could smell it. Wet fur and musk and something else, something ancient and wild. It reached out one massive hand. I raised my rifle, but it moved with impossible speed, knocking the weapon from my hands. Then it grabbed me by the jacket and lifted me off the ground like I weighed nothing. I dangled there, eye level with this creature, staring into those amber eyes, and I saw my death reflected there. But it did not kill me. Not yet. It held me suspended, examining me, its head tilting as if considering something. Then it made a sound, a vocalization that started low and rose in pitch. The other creatures responded, a conversation taking place in a language that predated human speech. The big one set me down, not gently but not violently either. It pointed at the ravine leading downstream, the direction Shadowkeeper had gone. Then it pointed at Night Warden and me. The meaning was clear. Leave. Follow your friend. Get out of our territory. It is letting us go, Night Warden whispered in disbelief. Not us, I said, understanding dawning. Just me. It wants me to carry you out, to tell the story, to warn others. The creature nodded, just once, confirming my interpretation. Then it gestured again at the downstream ravine, more insistent this time. I got Night Warden to his feet, or rather his foot, getting my shoulder under his arm. He bit back screams as we started moving, every step agony for him. The creatures watched us go, not following, just observing, making sure we left. We moved as fast as we could, which was agonizingly slow. The creek bed was treacherous, full of slippery rocks and deep pools. Several times Night Warden nearly passed out from the pain, but we kept going, driven by fear and adrenaline and the knowledge that those creatures could change their minds at any moment. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, we heard Shadowkeeper calling our names. She had circled back, unable to leave us behind. Together, the 3 of us made our way downstream, following the ravine as it widened and eventually merged with a larger creek. The rain had stopped, and through breaks in the canopy above, I could see hints of dawnlight. We hiked for 6 more hours, Night Warden delirious with pain, before we finally stumbled onto a Forest Service road. Shadowkeeper used the satellite phone to call for emergency extraction. A helicopter arrived within 40 minutes, medics immediately attending to Night Warden's leg while asking us what happened. Bear attack, I said, the lie coming automatically. We surprised a sow with cubs. Night Warden got hit before we could scare it off. The medics accepted this without question. Bear attacks happened. They made sense. What we had actually experienced did not make sense, so they would never believe it anyway. They transported us to Olympic Medical Center in Port Angeles. Night Warden underwent surgery for his shattered tibia. Shadowkeeper needed stitches for the gash on her head. I had a sprained ankle, multiple contusions, and what the doctor called severe trauma-induced stress response. The Park Service debriefed us the next day. I gave them the bear attack story. Shadowkeeper backed me up, and Night Warden, doped up on morphine, just nodded along. They seemed satisfied. Another tragic incident in the wilderness, but nothing that required further investigation. The research team was declared lost, presumed dead, bodies unrecoverable due to difficult terrain and weather conditions. Case closed. But Shadowkeeper and I knew the truth, and 3 weeks later, when I received an email from an account I did not recognize with no message and just an attachment, I knew the creatures wanted us to remember. The attachment was a video file. I opened it with shaking hands. It showed the interior of the cathedral, the bone structure we had found, filmed in daylight. The camera panned across the display of human remains and equipment, all arranged with deliberate care. Then the camera turned, and I saw who was holding it. Dr. Patricia Holbrook, the lead researcher, alive. Or at least, she had been alive when this was filmed. Her face was haggard, her eyes wild with terror. Her lips moved, speaking words the video had no audio to capture, but I could read her lips. Tell them not to come. Tell them to stay away. Tell them. The video cut off abruptly. I stared at the blank screen, my blood running cold. The creatures had let her live long enough to record that message. They had deliberately sent it to me, as a warning, as proof, as evidence that they controlled what information left the cathedral. I deleted the file immediately and destroyed the hard drive it had been downloaded to. I told no one about it, not even Shadowkeeper. Some things are too dangerous to share. Some truths will get you killed just for knowing them. I resigned from the Park Service the next month, 23 years of service, and I walked away without looking back. Shadowkeeper transferred to another state, as far from Olympic National Forest as she could get. Night Warden never worked as a ranger again. His leg healed, but the nightmares did not. Last I heard, he was driving a truck cross-country, staying as far from forest as possible. And the cathedral remains closed, officially due to seasonal trail maintenance. Unofficially because everyone who works for Olympic National Forest knows that some places are forbidden, some boundaries must not be crossed, some treaties, even if they were made thousands of years ago between humans and creatures that are not supposed to exist, must be respected. I think about the old ones often, about their intelligence, their society, their territory. They are not monsters, they are not animals, they are people, in their own way. Ancient people who were here long before we arrived and who have every right to defend what is theirs. But I also think about Dr. Holbrook and her research team, about the structure made from their bones, about the message she was forced to record, and I wonder how many others have found themselves in that position over the years. How many hikers who vanished, how many hunters who never came home, how many researchers who pushed too far into forbidden territory. The Hoh rainforest is one of the most beautiful places on Earth. Tourists flock there every year, marveling at the giant trees and the thick carpets of moss, taking photos and creating memories. They walk the maintained trails, follow the rules, stay in the designated areas, and they are safe because they do not go where they are not supposed to go. But 15 miles in, past the last trail marker, deep in the cathedral where the oldest trees grow and the fog never fully lifts, that is different territory. That is their land, and they will kill to protect it. This is my testimony, my confession, my warning to anyone who thinks they can explore every corner of the wilderness without consequence. You cannot. There are places that do not belong to humanity. There are borders that must be respected, and there are consequences for those who forget. The Hoh rainforest keeps its secrets, and I am keeping mine, because some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud. Some knowledge comes with a price I am not willing to pay again, but I am writing this account and sealing it away, to be opened only if I die under mysterious circumstances. Because if they come for me, if the old ones decide I know too much or have spoken too freely, someone needs to know what happened. Someone needs to understand that this is real. They are real. They are watching. They are waiting. And they will do whatever is necessary to remain hidden, to protect their territory, to maintain the ancient boundaries. May God have mercy on anyone who forgets that truth, because the old ones will show no mercy at all. I am Grim Sentinel, former senior ranger of Olympic National Forest. This is my testimony, believe it or not. But if you ever find yourself hiking deep in the Hoh, beyond the maintained trails, and you see trees marked with claw gouges, and you hear vocalizations that sound almost human, and you feel eyes watching from the darkness, remember what I have told you. Turn back. Immediately. Do not investigate. Do not try to get photos or evidence. Just leave, because the cathedral belongs to them. It always has, and they will defend it with a savagery that civilized minds cannot comprehend. The rainforest never stops growing, never stops spreading, never stops reclaiming what was taken. And in its deepest reaches, in places humans were never meant to go, the old ones wait, patient, ancient, eternal, and they will be there long after we are gone.